Design Board meeting for March 11th, 2024 has begun. We will start with roll call.
Why are we getting?
Are you on?
Hello?
Oh, hold on, guys. We're getting a strange echo right now.
Let's see what's going on.
Yeah, give us one moment to solve that. It might be the
Oh,
speakers
it's on
here.
everybody.
Is it the speakers behind your computer? Let's see. Did that fix it?
Nope.
No.
Testing. Testing.
Oh,
Yes, are you staying for that? Testing. Hello.
Let's see.
Okay. I think it stopped
Testing. Testing.
now. It stopped now.
Is there
There's no more
still?
Okay. I think we're good now.
Okay, we are testing again. Does it sound like a reverb?
No.
No? Great. Okay. So now our meeting has begun, and we'll start with roll call.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. We will do roll call. Chair Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Kloss,
Yes.
Board Member Graffiti,
Yes.
Board Member Sherry. Thank you. We have quorum.
Okay, great. We're going to start with any public comment. This is for anything not pertaining to one of the items on our agenda today.
Thank you. Yes, we will start with public comment. At this time, if anyone wishes to make a public comment, they may do so by bringing a slip to me. At this time, I do not have any slips. However, if you wish to do so, please fill one out and bring it to me. I do not see anyone making a move to do so, so we will go ahead and check virtual public comment. I do not have any hands raised for virtual public comment, and we did not receive any written correspondence for general public comment. So at this time, I will turn it back over to you, Chair Lewis.
Okay, great. So next is approval of the minutes from the full board meeting on February 26th.
A couple of comments. On item 2, High Ridge Lane, I think the comments are generally captured correctly, but I think there's a few items that need to be drilled down. Item 1, under the comments, says the applicant shall continue studying natural warm materials for the house. And I think that was colors. And I defer to Ms. Sherry because she was the maker of the motion. The other comment was item 3. The applicant should consider consistent hardscape in the front yard and screening of the proposed guest parking. I think the direction was to reduce the number of different hardscaping types on the project at large with an emphasis on one consistent hardscape in the front yard.
That's correct.
And those are my only comments.
Should we motion to approve? I'll make a motion to approve.
As noted?
As noted, yes.
All right, I'll second.
Great. We will take a vote. Chair Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Kloss,
Yes.
Board Member Graffiti,
Yes.
Board Member Sherry. Motion passes.
Okay, next is approval of the consent calendar for March 4th.
I was present for this meeting and I reviewed the minutes prior to the meeting and everything looks great. So I will make a motion to approve the meeting, approve the minutes for the March 4th consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Great. We will take a vote. Chair Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Kloss,
Yes.
Board Member Graffiti,
Yes.
Board Member Sherry. Motion passes.
Okay, so next, any announcements from staff?
we do have an announcement from one of our board members, so I'll let them take it away.
I've sent a letter of resignation into staff. They received that a couple weeks ago, and 2 weeks from today will be my final attendance at the Single Family Design Review Board. And I want to thank staff because staff has made a concerted effort over the course of the last 2.5 or 3 years that I've been a part of the board to really support us and work on the streamlining items that we're going to be looking at today. And I know that you have a lot of boards that you support, and the efforts have been appreciated, and the dedicated staff, Ellen, that you and Eli have devoted to the board have been much appreciated. So thank you for that.
And if I could just add to this announcement, again, a huge appreciation to Board Member Kloss. During your time as chair, you saw a lot of changes and maintained this board in a way that they're just being able to provide a foundation through some really rough patches, I'll say, and some really challenging projects. And I think, it's apropos. I'm really pleased that we'll be able to discuss the Single Family Design Board process improvements with you still here. And again, thank you for your leadership over these last couple of years. And we all wish you very well in your next steps and things beyond. But yes, thank you again for all of your dedication to the Single Family Design Board in the city.
Thanks so much. And I do intend to follow the streamlining process through, be around for a while to do that.
I would expect nothing less.
Thank you.
I have one announcement. I'm going to be absent from 3:15 till about 4:15 today.
And I'll echo staff though, but thank you for your service on the board and for chairing. So, thanks. Yeah. Any other comments? No? Okay.
That's it.
Then we will move on to our first item. This is a continued item here for project design approval, 1509 Shoreline Drive. This is a proposal to demolish an existing 3,155 square foot single-story, single-unit residence, a 431 square foot attached garage, and partially demolish an existing bluff-top accessory structure to abate violations and construct a new 3,701 square foot two-story single-unit residence, including a 2,167 square foot basement and an attached 462 square foot two-car garage. The Planning Commission approved a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the appealable jurisdiction of the coastal zone, in addition to a modification to allow overheight walls to encroach in the interior setback. The proposed total of 4,163 square feet of development on a 29,185 square foot lot is 87% of the maximum guideline floor to lot area ratio. And they're here for project design approval, and they were previously heard on, forget the date.
They were previously heard at the full board for conceptual review on November 30th of 2022.
Okay.
And before we get started, I would like to just mention that if the board could confirm that they reviewed the previous minutes and the video so that they can participate in the project design approval for this hearing. Thank you.
Oh, yes, I reviewed the videos and the minutes of the previous meeting.
I also reviewed the previous video and minutes.
Yes. Are you también?
As did I, and I also recall having been present for I think it was the informal conceptual review of the project at the outset back in, I think it was August prior.
Okay,
I did not review the video, but I'm leaving in 5 minutes anyway, and I understand that I can stay in the room. I just can't vote on or make comments on the project.
That's correct. You can ask questions,
I'll
but
leave it in a
not
few minutes.
participate in the vote.
Okay, so if you can make sure that your microphone is on and if you all state your name into the record, and then it would be helpful if you go through the previous minutes as a part of your presentation and any changes that have happened.
My name's Is this working? Okay.
Yeah.
Liz Hughes for Tom Oxner Architect.
Hi, Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning.
Chris Gilliland, Common Ground Landscape Architect.
Okay, so I'll go through the comments from the previous review. The first comment was to study lowering the plate heights. I'll skip ahead to the exterior elevations. We also included some exterior 3D renderings this time around, so there's some more materials included with this presentation, which I'll go over towards the end. So, on the previous application, the first floor plate, or first to second floor, was 10 foot 9.5 inches, or 11 foot 6.5 inches. It has been lowered to 10 foot 9.5 inches, so 9-inch change. Second floor plate height was 9 feet, lowered to 8 foot 10, so 2-inch change. But the most significant change was we did reduce the pitch of the roof from 4 and 12 to 3 and 12. So overall, the height reduction is 2 foot 1 inch, and that's measured from finished floor elevation. But it's consistently between the two projects. The previous overall height from finished floor was 26 feet, and the current is 23 feet, 11 inches. And these are the elevations. If you'd like me to pull up the previous ones to compare. Okay, let me see. Old plans. Here we go. Okay, so here's the previous. And we'll just compare the front elevations for now, so you can kind of see that difference in the roof pitch, how it's been brought down a little bit. So that's the first comment. Study any potential privacy issues along the south elevation that may be posed by the balcony. So we have page 4. Okay, we have this aerial view here, which shows this is the existing building footprint, the neighboring properties, and then the proposed building footprint is in gray, which I'm going to zoom in on this upper deck here. This is the deck that's referenced by that comment. And the building, so one of the other comments kind of lower on the list here was about, it doesn't say it specifically in the comments, but with the geologist report pulling the building more towards the street to get it, there was the hazards for screening area, which was the previous line that we were using as kind of the bluff edge setback. And now there's a slope stability line, which is about 22 feet inward of where the hazards for screening area was. So the building has been moved essentially to use that slope stability setback line as the bluff edge setback. And so the building has moved from this position to kind of farther towards the street. So in this location, there's some existing screening provided by trees on the neighboring property, which we're showing also on the landscape plans. So that deck is a second-story deck off of the master bedroom and not meant to be used as a party deck or a deck where people are out all the time, kind of making noise or bothering the neighbors. Provide a street silhouette. So we have, so this is interesting as well, because if this area of shoreline actually slopes down, so even though in our diagram here we're showing it as flat, this building here actually sits quite a bit above the neighboring building, so it's about 2 feet or 3 feet higher, and the roof is actually a little bit higher than what we're showing here as well. You can kind of get a feel for it from this 3D simulation, and this shows the story poles that were installed as part of the Planning Commission hearing. So all of these changes that were incorporated as part of moving the building back to the slope stability setback line were reviewed by Planning Commission in December. And then this is that simulation, and you can kind of get a sense of, even though it's in perspective, that this is sitting a little bit lower than that building as well. Same thing with the upstairs deck. So similar comment, the FAR, and setback from the street. So the building did move slightly closer to the street, but there is still a significant setback of about 50 feet or so from the street. The property line does go at an angle, so at the west end of the site, there's a little bit more room between the building and the street. Then we have the Gloriette, which, let's see. Here's our Gloriette here. This is the existing, and this is what Jarrett presented as part of the Planning Commission hearing. Jarrett, if you'd like to just go, I'll go through the slides for you here. These are just existing, and we'll go to the proposed.
Sure. Actually, scroll back up just a little
sure.
bit. So this was the only thing anybody talked about at the Planning Commission hearing. I reminded them that we were also proposing a house, but this is what they were interested in. The whole thing was about this. So that's the existing condition. Let's go down to the next slide. There's the modification for the wall heights. These are the walls they're talking about, and the Planning Commission granted it. And it's because if you remove those, our neighbors' houses and lots fall down. So they approved that. You can see the decking surface there. That was really the only question that we had at Planning Commission. So there's a good view of it right there. That's the other side and the other wall that we got the modification on. And then let's go down a little further. So this was just an exhibit we did to just really show what was going on with what we were demolishing. So we're leaving the structural portions of the Gloriette in place, but demolishing as much of it as possible. So everything in red there is pretty much going away. You can go down to the next slide. And this is what we'd be left with. So we're removing the soil to lay back, get rid of that whole big vertical wall, which is like one of the only things you could see from offshore, and putting it into a 2-to-1 slope, and then leaving the deck that's there. And why don't you go down to the last slide there? And this is pretty much, that's as close as you get to shore in boats. Basically, it starts getting pretty shallow and kelpy in there. So the white horizontal mass you can see there, where it says site, that's that back wall of the Gloriette, and most of that is going to be removed and replaced with landscaping that you would see in this view. And for the remainder of it, we're going to apply like an epoxy type base deck coating in an earth tone that will blend in, and we're going to apply that on the deck material and also on that wall, so that it, hopefully the goal is to just have it blend in to the top of the bluff and not really stand out the way that this does here.
So that's
it.
yeah, that's it.
Oh, the pink was
The story poles,
yeah,
maybe.
this is the story poles. I had zoomed in and outlined those so that you could have an idea of what, if any, portion of this house was visible from offshore, and that's what it would look like.
Great. So, and then the geologist recommendations, which the building has been moved based on those recommendations. Site photos, I believe that the site photos were done as a separate exhibit previously. I may be they didn't make it to the last hearing. I'm not sure what happened, but these were the photos that were part of that previous submittal. So we just kept it as a separate exhibit here, a view from the street. And you can see our approach to the design of this property is kind of opening up that front elevation, creating some interaction with the street, but also, you know, providing a nice landscaped buffer there. And just kind of, yeah, this wall is pretty severe. So softening that whole edge and creating an actual
Keeping
street
that
front.
tree, there were a lot of questions about that tree, not by the planning commission, but in the lead up to planning commission with staff. So that'll stay in the same place.
Yeah. So these are still more existing photos of that gloriette in the back there again. And then I also have some photos of the story poles in the set when they were installed. So those, but then a few additional photos from that front courtyard area. So this is kind of looking back from the driveway entry, kind of on the other side of the wall, looking towards the building. I believe this is the garage here. And then that, the second story there. And those are the photos I have. And then our 3D, and I'm going to zoom forward to landscape because, I mean, we have a lot of extra exhibits in here. We have our material board with some conceptual materials, and then a few 3D views, our stormwater plans, and then I'll move forward to landscape so Chris can talk about that.
I think there's a conceptual plan up for.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, if you could turn on your microphone, thank you.
Yep.
You think it's up this way?
Yeah, I think I saw it when you were scrolling earlier. We have basically our CDs almost ready to go. We just didn't want to get too far ahead, but
I think it might be further down. Is it this or this? This.
there you go.
Found it.
No, that's the planting plan, but it's pretty darn close. Let's just go to the planting plan, because that looks a lot like
'Kay.
the conceptual plan. So, I don't remember if we brought landscape in for concept before, so I don't know if you've seen this or not, but the inspiration behind the landscape was sort of a la Miramar. Clients are a big fan of that. You can see that reflected in the house. And so we have, it's kind of a subtropical thing happening in the front yard with boxwood hedges and palms. And then, of course, when we get to the backyard, because of the slope setback, it's all native on the right side of that red line. So we have a couple small native trees in there, and then it's all, I don't know if there's any landscape architects on the board, but all native prunus hedges, baccharis ground cover, some grasses and the like, deer grass and such. So then, yeah, going back to the front, we kind of bottom left, flagpole, upper left, fountain element off of the pedestrian entry, and a couple of, palms flanking the front entry. Otherwise, the client wanted to respect the neighborhood and actually let eyes see in. And so it's basically, as Liz alluded to, it's the opposite of the wall. So it's a really beautiful house, and I think they want to not close themselves off, excuse me, from the neighborhood. So, that's a kind of semi-formal subtropical in the front. Brick driveway, Pennsylvania bluestone for the patio. And that's the landscape. Thank you. And also, you do see those palms at the top of the page, top of the plan, the existing palms on the neighboring parcel. Anything else, Liz?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move to public comment.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. I'll start with in-person public comment. At this time, I do not have any slips. If anyone wishes to make a comment, they may fill one out and bring it to me. I do not see anyone in the audience moving to do so, so I will move on to virtual comment. At this time, I see no hands raised on virtual comment, so that will end the virtual comment. We did receive one written correspondence for this particular item, and that was from Barry Nyson. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chair Lewis.
Okay, great. So we're going to open up to questions from the board. Who would like to start us?
I got a couple.
Okay.
Can you were really good, Liz, about kind of summarizing what happened with Planning Commission and movement of the building footprint, et cetera. Were there any changes to the architecture itself, aside from the height reductions that you enumerated, relative to what we saw, or what I didn't see but saw in the video today at the last meeting?
Sure. There were some changes. As a lot of changes go, if you're not actively involved working on the project,
Yeah.
you may not notice them. So I can go
In
over
any
that.
significant effect on, sort of mass or volumes is kind of what I'm
Yeah.
looking for, or significant changes in fenestration, specifically on the, I'll call it the easterly and westerly side yard property lines.
I would say not on the easterly and westerly were the least affected elevations to any changes. I do not think that we increased any window sizes on those sides, as far as I know. One change that did happen was this entry volume was pulled out slightly, just in working through the design of the stair. We needed a little bit more room, and so we couldn't push it back the other way because of the slope stability setback, and we had already kind of coordinated all this stuff on the interior, so it got pulled out slightly to accommodate the stair design that we are proposing. Some things that happened on, I'm going to call it the south elevation here. Some of the openings got larger, and I'll go to that elevation to take a look at that. Particularly this opening here that's under the covered patio. It was previously French doors with 2 fixed side lights, and the owners wanted to be able to open that up to have an indoor-outdoor living space. This door as well was more of a wood look door with like a double French with side lights, and changed to be essentially a steel sliding door to allow for more visibility to the view from that room. So those were the changes on that elevation. Let's see. This is the east elevation, so you can see we have a few small openings on the upper level and essentially nothing on the lower level.
So those windows on the upper level then, they look like they reduced in square footage from the last. I think they were longer and taller. Okay, so that was one of the things that I was looking for.
Oh, yes, they did reduce.
Okay.
Which makes sense because that's the master bedroom. So we did want some privacy, not just for the neighbors, but for the occupants of our building as well. So those are some smaller windows on that side. And then along the west elevation as well, we have some smaller windows on the upper level.
Okay.
Take a look at that.
Is any of the wall at the front property line remaining? It's all gone. Okay. And do you have any photos that would inform us better about the height of the palms that are on the east property line?
Let's see.
Like maybe just a couple photos from the
Yeah, let me
front where we would see those?
Zoom back to the beginning here. This?
Doesn't show much.
There were some from the street I saw. I don't know if it was a silhouette.
Okay.
There you can see
You can see
them.
a few here, but the ones we're talking about, I think, maybe a little bit further.
There we go. That's a good shot, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Fairly
Okay.
mature, clean palms.
Okay, and then the last question I had was a comment that Mr. Arhakelian had made at the last board meeting, which was related to privacy for the easterly neighbor. And I think he had requested that some sort of screening element be provided on that master deck running parallel to that easterly property line. I'm just wondering if that was implemented. I don't think that it has been.
It hasn't been.
Okay.
The movement of the building in that previous configuration kind of happened before I came on board. So I asked this question, and I think that the idea was that moving the building provided additional privacy, and that's how they intended to address the concern. But that there wasn't anything physically added to the building itself to provide privacy.
Okay. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
So, adding on to Leslie's comments, just to get clarity around neighborhood guidelines and compatibility. Yeah, I mean, have you discussed, and part of the thing that really helps us, which you provided in Google Earth, I guess, is the adjacent site structures and how those decks relate to the adjacent neighbors. So A, have you had conversations with that adjacent neighbor with the deck positioning since it's moved up? Because we have to make findings on privacy of deck, right? And then did you bring any further adjacent structures or site plan that shows us the footprint of those neighbors in relation to where those decks land and windows land? Something like, it just makes our lives a lot easier to have
It may
that
be
provided.
helpful if you pull up page 4 in your drawing plan and kind of walk us through on that site plan.
Yeah, I'm not sure that decks are shown on that.
No, but if she can indicate.
Yeah, I am not familiar with what exactly is happening on the other side on the neighbor's property, nor have I spoken to these neighbors about their concerns.
I think our landscape plan shows those neighboring buildings, but I don't know if it exactly shows the decks, the second-story decks. But I know we show the buildings, or at least hint at them. If you go back to that planting plan, or...
Are you looking at specifically the locations of windows along this edge, or?
Well, okay, so there's 2 decks in the back, and sorry, familiarize, we go through a critical path of review. Familiarize me again with there's 2 decks on the back.
They're up.
And then there's one in the upper end too, or maybe you just, I'll go to.
The gray footprint.
The proposed house is just the top gray.
Okay, so this portion, the white is the existing, and this, I guess, white area is the proposed deck on the second floor, and this indicates the proposed deck on the second floor on the other side. This one's farther from the property line and has more screening, so I don't think that was a concern, but this deck here, which is closer to the property line, is the one that we were talking about. And I believe that this element here is a garage. So there aren't necessarily, you're not looking onto windows of
Any
another
privacy
person's.
windows,
Yeah.
right, okay.
And I would imagine that this residence is primarily focused on the ocean side openings with probably some smaller openings along the side yard. I do understand the concern for screening into a backyard area potentially, which we were hoping the mature existing planting would address.
And all those palms are remaining, right? So, yeah, that's the landscape screening, got it. Okay, that helps us with the findings as well. Okay, and then the plate heights. I know, thank you very much for, we're just looking for some compromise with our comments typically. But you kind of quickly went through the old plans. And the old existing plate height was 11'6", but I didn't, can you zoom in and show me that it's 11'6"?
I believe I measure, 11 foot 1.5, sorry. 1.5.
11 foot
Yeah,
1.5.
11 foot 1.5, there you go.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
you have a plate difference of 1.5, and now you have 1.3. Okay, and then you had 10, and the second floor you reduced by what, 2 inches or something like that?
Yes.
But then overall, yeah, the 4 to 12 to 3 created a 2'1" finished floor drop. Okay, that helps. The height of the cupolas there, I mean, and I get that those are venting the whole roof and all of that. I'm just curious, because it's, it's a big mass that's going to change the neighborhood. So just curious if you know what the top of those cupola vents are.
I don't.
Okay.
But I mean, technically, that's an architectural projection, so.
Right, yeah. The roof shingles, the hardy roof shingles, did you consider any other product?
I thought these were Bella Forte shakes. They're supposed to be like a cedar look type shake. It may have been a misprint if that's what, let's see, hold on. Let's go back to material board. So, oops. So it won't let me do that. So this is, oh yeah, that's a misprint on there. So there is a different, it may actually be on the material index here. You can see Bella Forte shake with the color called out. Sorry about that. Weathered gray is the color.
Bella Forte shake. Okay, weathered gray. Awesome. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Did you consider earth tone, since the Gloriette is now earth tone blending into the hillside? It's typically what we want to see. We brought up colors of the main house. And now we're doing earth tone on the Gloriette down below, but we're not moving it up to the structure. It's still white primarily.
Yeah, I don't think that our goal is to relate the Gloriette at all in any way to the main structure. That's an existing feature that we are
Separating.
yeah, attempting
Okay.
to mask.
There you go.
So, and I do think that although in many cases we do tend to provide more like neutral colors for this specific residence and the style of the residence, we felt that it was appropriate for it to be white, particularly in this neighborhood where you have a lot of seaside type cottage homes. The coloring of this home seemed to be in keeping with the character that we're trying to create.
Colonial Miramar.
Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then you're doing a thin or a full brick veneer?
We haven't determined that. It does say 1 inch, but
Yeah.
I don't think there's not a.
Full brick.
Yeah, there's not a specification yet on that.
Okay. Well, it doesn't really matter for us. Okay, and it looks like then the upper windows on the back side of the house are white and the lower windows are black, just the elevation?
Yeah, so the idea was, we did want to have a few for these view, primarily the view windows, and then also the front door as kind of like a feature element to have the steel look. Right now, what's specified on here is I believe it's Arcadia's custom steel look aluminum, to have that thin profile to obstruct as little as possible towards the view. The rest of the doors and windows are going to be standard aluminum clad with a white finish, kind of more on the traditional
Right.
side.
It's different. Okay. All right. I think that's it for me.
Questions?
Nope, all answered. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I just have one question. If the neighbor that spoke at the last meeting, if she had reached out to any of your teams about the privacy concerns? Okay.
Chair Lewis, no, she didn't, and we didn't have any public comment at all at the Planning Commission hearing either.
Okay, perfect. Then we'll move on to comments, but it looks like staff has a comment.
I was just going to say, thank you, Megan Arciniga, project planner. There was one received, but I think it was from a resident that was much further up in the neighborhood, and it was more concerned with just overall views of a single story going to a two-story. And then I did want to note that, yes, the Planning Commission condition is for the Glorietta to be earth tone in color. Personally, so I worked a lot in telecommunications facilities that are intended to recede into the natural landscape, and for all of that work, I will say darker colors actually recede much better than lighter earth tones. So currently it is an earth tone color. It's a beige-ish. So when you want to blend into natural features, usually playing with the shadows is much more successful. So previously, like the colors like of our trash cans and all that black and beam kind of grayish green tends to recede. So I would ask your board, in looking at earth tone, if you could be specific in your direction to the applicant so they at least know what earth color are we matching here, and kind of a range of, so that they can come back with something.
Bring my Pantone color.
Or do you have a color indicated
do
on here? I
that.
was looking at your color.
There
Oh,
is-
the paint had the Gloria. There it is.
There is a
Okay.
color, yeah, but it is kind of like a lighter taupe color, so may need to be a few shades darker than that.
So maybe a question to our board is, how do you feel about this color or slightly darker, as long as it stays in a brown scheme?
Yeah, I would say something closer to an actual earth tone, like an actual dirt color.
More brown,
Dirt, yeah.
okay.
Okay. All right.
Is that just the color proposed for I'll call it the podium itself, or is that also proposed for
Vertical
the portion of the wall that remains?
It's for everything.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we'll start with comments then. Back on this side.
I'll go. I think the project's fine. I think you've addressed our comments for the greatest part. Happy to see this drop the 2 feet. That brings it roughly the same height as the neighboring parcel to the west, which is, I think, what the original concern was on most board members' parts. I have a question about the glass material that's proposed for the light fixture, but I'm sure that could be vetted at final. It looks like it's kind of a seeded glass, but with the LED lights that we have these days, I think that could still get pretty glaring. So I would prefer to see more of a frosted glass or a ground glass for that. I agree that a darker color for the Glorietta or Gloriette would be preferred, somewhere in a darker tan or almost a coffee bean color. Just two architectural comments. The cupola on the garage feels a little bit disproportionate, a little tall for the garage. I think the ones on the house itself look okay, but, and it's funny because in this rendering, it looks the opposite, but in one of your other photos, it looked really tall. So I guess that merits some additional study. And personally, so when I think about privacy issues, I don't think about just between two houses. That interior courtyard in my mind is a sacred space for the next door neighbors. That's where I might want to sunbathe in a way that I wouldn't want people watching me. And so I think that having a screening element on that upper deck off of the master bedroom on the east side is important. And given the orientation of the property and where buildings are on the easterly parcel, I really think the primary views for the owners of this project are going to be to the southwest. And so I don't think that that would really negatively affect their ability to enjoy their home, but I think it would greatly increase the ability for the neighboring owner to continue to appreciate their courtyard. So given the proximity of that upper deck to property line, which I think is somewhere in the 9-foot area, and it doesn't completely meet our guidelines, I would like to see a condition placed on a motion that there be some sort of screening element there on that easterly line. It might be a lattice that could be planted out with something green. I'm sure that there's some way that you guys can figure to address that. So those are my comments. Thank you.
I think that it's a great project, and agree with Leslie's comments, and I think we're ready to move forward with design approval.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fantastic project. I appreciate you guys bringing it down, and I think this is definitely within the realm of this neighborhood and recent nearby projects we've approved. So I'm also ready to move forward with PDA.
Okay, great. Me too. I want to thank you guys for all the visuals. I think it's fantastic and very easy to understand and how it compares to the neighbors. I think it's a huge improvement to what's there existing. And I think that the scale works well next to the adjacent homes. I agree with the privacy concerns. Unless the adjacent neighbor wants to speak positively on the behalf of it, I think that screening it would be very beneficial and also meet our guidelines. And or I think you guys are 4 feet away from making it the 15 feet. So if there's a way of reducing the size or pushing it off, that's also an option. I think the palms and like the placement do help, but there's no guarantee that those are staying there. So I would be in support of keeping that as a part of the conditions of approval. And I agree with everything.
Part of my interruption here, I just wanted to state that we are also looking for approval of the modification for the overheight walls to encroach in the interior setback. So
And that's the Glorietta.
the planning commission on that approval does. Yeah.
I think it was approved, correct?
Wasn't that
So
already?
that was already approved, so we
That
don't.
was
Oh, right.
approved at
Okay.
PC,
Thank
right?
you. I rescind that comment then.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Perfect. Does someone want to start a motion? Otherwise, I will.
I'll just reiterate my comments
Okay,
then, I
perfect.
think. So I'd like to make a motion for project design approval with the following comments. That the applicant considers studying the proportions of the cupolas before returning for final approval. This would be do you want indefinite continuance for final, or?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to indefinitely continue this back to consent if it's acceptable to the full board. with the following comments, that the applicant study the proportions of the cupolas, specifically the one on the garage. Concerns are that it may feel too tall, that the glass material for the exterior sconces be revised to be a ground or frosted glass, that the Glorietta paint be changed to a darker color that is tantamount to the natural earth color in the backyard. And that some sort of screening element be provided at the east side of the upper deck off of the master bedroom in order to provide increased privacy for the easterly neighbor. Or another option would be to bring that deck into conformance with SFDRB guidelines and have it be, I think it's required to be 15 feet back from side yard property line. That's the motion.
I'll second.
Great.
Yeah, we also have to go through,
thank you.
yeah, all the comments,
All
so
those.
if we
Okay.
could have the screen switch so we can
Yeah,
go
if
through
you
that,
could
thank you.
pull all the findings up. We can make neighborhood preservation findings because the project is consistent in appearance with the neighborhood. It is compatible. It's roughly the same height as the bulk, the majority of the residences in the neighborhood. It incorporates a seaside type of architecture that is appropriate for this area of town. Quality architectural materials are being used, wood materials reminiscent of shake roofing, siding, brick. I do not believe that the project proposes the removal of any significant trees. Can that be confirmed by the applicant?
That is correct.
Okay, so this item D is moot. And we believe that the health, safety, and welfare of the public are being preserved and potentially increased and bettered by the actions that are being taken, going to take place by the applicant in order to stabilize the bluffs, and that the applicants have been responsive in terms of good neighborhood guidelines by increasing the distance on the westerly property line between the residence and the westerly neighbor relative to what was originally proposed, and that the conditions will secure privacy for the easterly neighbor from the second floor deck. And there is no significant detriment to public views beyond that which already exists in this neighborhood. Again, the building scale is in keeping with the neighborhood, and the addition of the proposed endemic plantings will help to stabilize the existing topography on the site.
Okay, that's everything.
Great, okay, so now that's a motion.
Yes, thank you.
And now I'll
All right.
second it.
We will take a vote. Chair Lewis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson?
Yes.
Board Member Kalas?
Yes.
Board Member Graffiti?
Yes.
Board Member Sherry? Oh, I forgot she's done. Motion passes.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And this is just for the applicant. That does start the appeal period for this item. So if we don't receive anything in 10 days, we'll be awaiting your resubmittal for consent final approval. Thank you.
On 5 minutes early, we're going to start item 2. This is a continued item here for project design approval and final approval. 1932 Cleveland Avenue. It's a proposal to construct a 443 square foot addition and a new 327 square foot basement to an existing 890 square foot single unit residence located in the Hillside Design District. The project includes a new roof deck above an existing garage and landscaping. The proposed total of 2,132 square feet of development on a 5,520 square foot lot is 83% of the maximum guideline floor to lot area ratio, or allowable floor area. Zoning modifications related to open yard, front setback, interior setback, and fence hedge height standards were granted by the staff hearing officer on November 1st. Project design approval and final approval are requested. Welcome. So if you can make sure your microphone is on and state your names, and then it would be helpful if you walk us through the minutes and how you've addressed anything there, and then any changes between the drawings that we saw last time.
And just part of my interruption, as with the last time, I forgot to put the last time this project was reviewed. So for those watching and those in the room, for context, this project was last reviewed at full board for conceptual review on September 11th of 2023. All board members, according to the records, were present for that hearing, so all of you should be familiar with this project. Thank you. Would you mind switching the screen? Through the chair to the applicant, the previous minutes should be up on the third tab on your screen on the laptop. So if you want to select that, and
Okay.
it says minutes 9/11/23. And then you should be able to scroll down to the project address, 1932 Cleveland Avenue. Thank you.
There you go. Okay, so my name is Mark Winke. I'm with Windward Design Services.
Kyle Dixon, Windward Design Services.
Okay, so, all right. Are those the notes? So basically, as mentioned, we have been to everybody and seen everything, and I think we're completed with everything. We're here for final and preliminary at the same time. If you remember back to this project, it's basically a small addition to the right-hand side of the property as you look up the hill. It's a master bedroom with a basement below that is now being used, or is going to be used as another bedroom. And it's a downhill site, so it also has a deck on between the old house and the new addition. And there's a garage in front that's on the property line in front. So all those things were interesting to push forward on and got approvals. So let's see, the board recommends lowering the guardrail. This is the garage comment, number 1, to match the design aesthetic of the railing and siding combination of the deck back at the house. We did that. It's about 16 inches between the top of the rail.
Flipping and showing us in your plans.
Oh, I'll go back to the
Thanks.
plan. I think there's only 2. Can I say them both at the same time? Okay, the board is aesthetically in support of the open yard deck setback. That was in the front. So these are all the things that you guys were approved of, and then went to the staff hearing officer. Okay, that's basically it. That's what the house and the addition looks like on the right. And let's see here. You don't care about the civil design. Oh, shoot. They're not little pages.
Yeah, through the chair to the applicant, there is a mouse there next to the laptop. Might be more useful. And then you are currently on the old plan set. Just wanted to notify you of that if you wanted to go to the.
Yeah, the very first tab has your current ones.
Well, that's what I clicked.
And I think on page 39 might be a good view.
Okay. It's a little cumbersome because I'm used to seeing little teeny icons where you just find the one in press. That's not occurring on this sheet. Do you think 39? Yes. Okay. Okay, so there you go. That's the view, kind of a rendering view from the front. The existing garage is just concrete block with I call it a guardrail above it. That's been there for safety for over a couple, for 20 years plus. And this is now the roof deck above. There's the lowered height and then a guardrail above to match the upstairs area. There's the stairs coming up. All this existing, all this is existing, all that's existing. And so the design is to do this handrail and to cover the existing CMU block with siding to match the house. That's it.
Okay, great. Well, you have about 11 minutes, 11 and a half minutes left when we.
Okay. I have a
if you
song I
want it
prepared for
later.
everybody.
Yeah, there you go. But we'll move to public
come with the
comment
dance?
then.
We do.
We didn't rehearse this.
We didn't talk about the landscaping last time, did we?
We did.
We did.
We did, okay. Then we don't have a song anymore. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair Lewis. I will start with in-person public comment. At this time, I do not have any slips for public comment, but if anyone wishes to make one, please fill one out and bring it to me. I see no one in the audience moving to do so, so we will move on to virtual comment. At this time, there are no hands raised for virtual comment, so we will move on to written correspondence, and for this particular item, we did not receive any written correspondence. And at that, I will turn it back over to you, Chair Lewis.
Great. So I will start with the first question. Were there any other changes to the design besides the handrail being added?
Maybe the trash location.
Okay,
which is
can you
part of the
show us that?
landscaping. Okay. Your plans are probably after these. This is kind of the general, that Chris will show you the plan. At the top of the stairs here, there's an area we've kind of carved out. You go around it to this side to get into the cans, and it's like a 6-foot-high wall.
Yeah, and we had previously shown it at the back of the garage roof.
Right.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the board? Yes.
Yes. Do you have a detail of the rail? The guardrail at the garage and the new?
Do you know if we have detail on the guardrail?
We do.
Because you're here for PDA and final.
Oh, here's the landscaping. Okay. There's the location of the trash, as we just mentioned. You want to go
Correct.
to anything else? Or-
No.
Okay, but that's page 11.
Yeah, there wasn't really real other changes, so.
The detailing for the connection will be A502.
Oop.
I believe it's through the structural into the architectural detailing.
And that's,
You said
I think we
502.
can, yeah,
That's
A502.
on page 42. Page 42.
I appreciate your help.
Mine's a little easier to navigate with Bluebeam.
There it is,
Yeah.
number 2.
So cable
seven.
rail. Wait. I thought we were.
And number 7
Yeah.
shows.
Can you see that one?
So the direction was originally to try to match that which was on the main residence, right? Do you have any pictures of that, what is on the main residence, or is that going to be a new proposed guardrail also?
That's all new too.
Okay, so it'll all match one another. Okay.
But where's the detail? Because we're here for PDA and
It's,
final.
That's number
So-
two.
Number
it's right
7.
there, it's number 7.
Number 7, okay, so it's wood or steel, and then you're gonna cover it with the cedar. And then to get the raised, are you building on top of it with the wood, to get the 12 or the 16-inch additional, what you're showing in the rendering? Or,
Yeah.
so, but that detail's not showing that.
It's kind of a combo between 2 and 7, is that right?
It looks like on the page above, you have a perspective detail with the handrail section. That's at your stair and guardrail on page 41.
It's cable rail. I thought it was wood.
Well, this looks like, yeah, there you go, on the top left there. So is the intent that this same kind of guardrail is what's being hidden behind the wood elsewhere?
That was my question. Are you building two sets of guardrail? Or is it like you're building the wood or the cable rail handrail on top of the rail?
I think it would be on top.
It's on top, it's a short wall with the wood rail on top. Yeah. I don't think it's cable rail. I don't think that was a mistake.
Okay, so it's
more
to
like
be
this. You
wood,
can
not
see on this.
cable.
Yeah, your section has it a little better.
Okay, that's what I thought
Zoom into
too.
that, but it's, yeah, small pickets vertically.
So it's a vertical picketed wood guardrail.
Right.
Correct, yeah. The steel supports will be mounted to the fascia of the existing garage.
Uh-huh.
And then the siding will be brought up to
Yes.
just the underside. I think it's about 36. And then that rail system will be mounted on the top of that with a cap. Along the side, same thing, we'll be doing kind of like a rain strain. So it'll be a 1 inch half gap, and we'll try to bring that in so that the edge is flush from the front of the garage to the edge of that rail.
Yeah,
Can we see the front elevation then? Because it looks to me like on the top of the garage, you're showing, that's a different
That looks wood.
condition, right? That's not the same as what I'm seeing in the upper right on the main residence.
Right. Sorry. Some parts of the main residence, the railing goes, or the balustrades go from floor to rail. And then this part here, which is the
Okay.
deck. And the only reason that's there at a certain distance height is so that when you walk up to the house, you don't look up into people's
It's privacy.
private areas.
Okay.
And so that's sort of a protection. From the deck, when you look out over that railing, it's held down lower so you can see to the trees.
Well, and I think that was our original intent.
Yeah.
that It was just to match
Exactly.
that new, and then the guardrail to the left is existing,
Yeah.
and then the other just is open because it's stairs, so you can see and you don't need the privacy.
Right, and we
Okay.
made that garage match because it was too much volume or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to
massing
bring it
above
down
the,
a little
garage
bit.
door.
I remember that,
come in.
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
I have one other question. Do we have a spec anywhere on here for the light fixtures that are going over the carriage doors?
Yeah, these were chosen early on and no one's ever,
Is this one the touch screen? It might be a touch if you want to test
Yeah.
that out. There you go. That might be easier.
oh, nice.
You had it
Not
there.
that's any better,
Okay.
for me at least.
I think you had it.
Yeah,
I did?
just
Yeah.
down a little.
Here, let it go.
Yeah, right.
There
Okay,
we go.
yeah, there it is.
Yes, you can. There we go.
Oops, yeah, see, it's easy. There you go. This is what the owners picked 3.5, 4 months ago,
Is that gonna get smashed? I don't know.
so.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
Yes, so the existing is shiplap cedar. Your detail shows tongue groove on one of the details, so I'm assuming that it's going to be shiplap natural stain.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess we don't need to go to that detail. And then you're not using any black metal panel siding or masonry veneer. Those are just like keynotes that maybe came from another set that are standard or something like that.
If the first part black something, might be the trim on the roofing.
Metal panel black siding, not
No, there's no
fascia,
siding
painted
anymore, no.
fascia, yeah.
I think in an earlier scheme, we had some black vertical
Panels.
panels, but we opted just to go keep it El Natural.
Okay, all right, cool. Window and door manufacturer, it looks like you have that there, and maybe I missed it.
Yeah, it's really tiny.
So who is it, Lowen?
It's Marvin.
Oh, Marvin, okay, cool. All right, and the gutters are just sheet metal black,
Correct.
okay. And do we go over generator or mechanical?
We haven't, but we can look at the mechanical. It'll be at the end of this slide.
Mechanical heating?
Are you adding any or generator, anything else?
No, no generator. They are probably going to do a mini split. The house right now is old, so they have been putting up with an in-wall unit,
Okay.
which they hope to
Inside.
abandon.
Nothing exterior.
No.
Okay, cool. Questions? Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, none from here. So comments? Start on this end.
I think it's going to be a great improvement to the property, and I'm really happy that you pursued the modifications for the garages and for the patio. I think it's completely appropriate for the neighborhood, and I think it benefits the project. So kudos for taking the time and the applicant being, the owners being willing to spend the money to go through that process. I think it benefited the project. I have really no comments, with the exception of the couple clarifications that Chair Anderson was mentioning. I'm sorry, Vice Chair Anderson was mentioning.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great project, and you came back with definite improvements, and the addition blends great, the garage is great, privacy screening great. But I feel, I don't know, I'm just a little concerned about PDA and final at the same time, because I feel like the architectural details are not accurate. But I'm assuming that we maybe can make conditions to correct those details and citing information that are not completely accurate.
I would feel comfortable, and I'm curious, the rest of the board, giving final with those stipulations included in with it. Mhm.
Yeah, I concur.
I also agree. I'm fine giving final with those conditions. I think it's an amazing project, so many improvements, and I'm so happy that they're going to be able to use the space above the garage too. I think that's a great add through this process. So thank you for all of that. Yeah, and I'm like I said, happy to do PDA and final.
Great. So
tiny
thank you.
little
I
lot every
agree
square
with
foot
everyone else.
helps.
Does anyone want to make a motion then?
I'm on a roll.
I
I'm just
know,
going to go
you
for it
have-
today.
go ahead.
I've only got
Sure,
2 more
yeah,
meetings left,
yeah.
so now I'll make a deal. I'll give it to you if one of you applies to replace me. Okay? If only I could do that.
That was off the record.
That was completely off the record, on the record. I will make a motion for project design approval and final approval with the following comments, with the following conditions, that the exterior siding, any new exterior siding match the shiplap natural stained siding on the main residence. And we are clarifying that there are no black panels on vertical surfaces that are being proposed. That any proposed mechanical equipment sit outside of setbacks and meet required decibel levels. And is there anything else that you want added there? That the wood guardrail detail be clarified and corrected prior to building department submittal to reflect actual conditions. And are there any findings that need to be made as part of this motion? If those could be brought up, please. So we're going to make neighborhood preservation findings, and they are going to be made, let's see, consistency and appearance. The development is consistent with the scenic character of the city. It's a diminutive project that is compatible in size and bulk and scale with the neighborhood. The already approved via the show hearing officer use of the deck on top of the carriage house garage is a typical pattern of development in the neighborhood. The tall hedges will maintain privacy for the owners and will not inhibit any public views. Quality architectural materials are being used, wood, nice metal work, and those will blend nicely into the ridgeline and hillside as they weather and patina over time. Don't believe any trees are being removed, so this item is moot. The health, safety, and welfare of the public are being preserved and protected. There's stormwater management that's being done as part of this project, and that will help to ensure the safety and stability of the hillside condition. Good neighborhood guidelines have been met. There's no anticipated negative effect on neighbors' privacy. And again, there's no effect on public views. Natural topography protection is maintained, both visually in terms of the fact that this is a small diminutive structure, so it doesn't affect ridgeline viewing from down below. And the permeable pavers will help to stabilize and provide proper groundwater management. And I've said enough about the building scale, so I'm not going to say anything more, but clearly it complies.
I will second that motion.
Great, we will take a vote. Chair Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Kloss,
Yes.
Board Member Graffiti,
Yes.
motion passes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Okay,
And,
Mark, seriously.
And this is just to the applicant that does start the appeal process for this project. So it's going to be 10 calendar days. And at the end of those 10 days, you'll be able to submit to Building and Safety and move forward with your project. Thank you.
Okay. Is the board okay taking a 5-minute break? Okay. We will take a 5-minute break before our next item. reconvene the Single Family Design Board meeting for March 11th. And we are moving on to our third item, which is a discussion item on the Single Family Design Board process improvements. The city staff will be presenting a conceptual level discussion of the proposed Single Family Design Board process improvements. The discussion will include proposed code amendment concepts to reduce the number of SFDB design review triggers and to expand opportunities for administrative staff review, which will help cut down on the number of SFDB projects that require a public hearing. So, you're welcome. And you want to make sure your mics are on.
All right, thank you, Chair Lewis. Hello, board members. I'm Ted Hamilton Roll, project planner in the design review section. I'm joined by Ellen Kokinda, the design review supervisor, and welcome to the first concept review, so to speak, of the SFDB process improvement code amendments. We're really happy to be here. We have a lot to talk about today, but we're going to try to keep the presentation part short so that we allow time for discussion. After this slide, we're going to go into public comment. And then we're going to dive into our code amendment concepts. Now, we're not going to cover each and every proposed code amendment that we're going to do, but just the major ones we want your feedback on at this time. After we go through our discussion, we'll go through next steps. So Chair Lewis, I'll turn it over to you for public comment.
Okay, great. Which I'll turn back over here. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Lewis. We will start with in-person public comment. We do have people who are interested in speaking. We will invite up first Mr. Jarrett Gonin to the podium. You will have 2 minutes to speak, please.
Hi, Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning, and I actually was hoping to see all of these proposals and different things to comment on rather than comment in advance. But if there's one thing that I wish we would change in the single-family design board triggers, it's the automatic requirement that any changes to a 4,000 square foot house comes to the board. There are a lot of changes that can happen that really aren't worth your board's time at a full hearing. They could easily be handled by staff. We have a couple of these projects come through our office recently. But for example, if somebody's just changing out windows on a 4,000 square foot house, we've got to come here. And it takes time away from other applicants on your agendas that your board really does need to see. And I'm sure that you would prefer to be looking at projects that you'd have more of a significant impact on the design rather than window change outs. So since I haven't seen everything and I'm commenting in advance, that is our one wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gorin. Next up, we have Fred Sweeney. Please approach the podium. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Mr. Sweeney also provided a written comment for you to review.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the board. Some of you may know me as a former member of this board for 10 years and served as, I think, 6 years as its chair. And I just passed it out a page. Excuse me, I just came from filling a crown, so my mouth is still a little sore. Did you all get a copy of my comments?
I think
Staff did.
the secretary passed it around.
Okay, I gave you 8 copies. So there should be enough for everyone to look at. I am not going to read through this document because that won't happen in 2 minutes. But I can leave you with a couple of things. One is this idea of style. I read through the entire 116 pages and read most of the comments. And the issue of style has to do with the architecture that's being proposed by the applicant. And if I urge you not to be subjective about the architecture. Every homeowner has the right to propose a style. Your big issue is the compatibility issue of the neighborhood. And as I've repeatedly said over many occasions, the term compatibility has not been defined in the code in a way I think that's helpful to the single-family design board. So that's going to be a major task for you to move forward in relationship to how do you look at style. So you need to look at individual styles in the case of what they're proposing, not what you'd like or what you think is correct. What they're proposing, is it an appropriate solution to the style that they're proposing? That's what you need to be looking at. And I could talk for a long time. I can answer a lot of questions, but my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Next up, we will have Brian Miller. If you could please approach the podium. Mr. Miller, you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hello, my name is Brian Miller, and previous to Fred, I've been on this board too for quite a while. And I think what the two gentlemen just spoke are very good comments and should be seriously considered. However, my comment, or the thing I want to say, and it's more of a context, is why are we having such a problem with the single-family design board now, whereas 5 years ago it wasn't as big of an issue? And I think that's something seriously you should look at as to what is the pressure being imposed on the design board today that wasn't an issue 5 years ago. And I think it's more of a political thing to look at, but I think that's really important to understand. The other thing I want to say about Santa Barbara and why we have a design review board is we're not like a normal city. And I think a lot of people that come into our city, a lot of consultants, a lot of property developers and speculators come in here with the assumption that they can do what they did in Oxnard or what they did in Oklahoma City. But in Santa Barbara, this is a destination city. This is a world-renowned city. And people outside of our influence here see this city as a place to be arrived. Like, people spend a lot of money to live here. It's expensive to live here. That will not change. It has never changed. A lot of times the politicians struggle on housing, affordable housing. How are we going to get affordable housing? And that's going to be an issue that will not really resolve in this city. The other thing about this city that I think is unusual or something to really be attributable to this city is how emotionally attached people that live here are as opposed to a normal other city. And because of that, the intensity of people getting upset is, the volume is raised considerably louder because of their emotional attachment of how amazing this city is. And I think those are things that you really need to consider when you're adapting whatever you are going to do for, the future of this design board. But you're always going to be confronted with people that will not like what you're doing. There will be a group that'll love it, but there will be another group that'll hate it. And that's always going to be the case. It's always been the case. And I think that's something to consider. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Next, we will have Mr. Jim Brinkman. Please approach the podium. You will have 2 minutes to speak.
I'm Jim Brinkman. I reside at 1261 Farello Road. I'll be short. A 200-square-foot second-story deck that will be under ministerial permit will assuredly create privacy impacts to neighboring yards. A deck of this size can easily accommodate 8 to 10 individuals. This is not consistent with the Good Neighbor Guidelines, which states decks that should not be placed in direct line of sight of neighboring decks and patios. On hillsides, noise is amplified and voices carry. Case in point, the Santa Barbara Bowl was built to take advantage of this. Please keep this in consideration. Screening should also be provided on decks to ensure privacy for neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brinkman. With that, we will move on to.
Just say a minute or two. I was hoping to, like Mr. Horn, that it was going to be a presentation, and then afterwards, but anyway.
All right, we have Ms. Newhouse. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Okay, it's Neuhauser. I looked at it and it looked like the changes in the projects, although I know everybody in the whole world is overworked. It didn't seem like there were that many changes in the projects. In other words, when you looked at the bottom part and it said current versus how it would change if you made the changes. So it didn't look like it was going to change that much workload, which I know everybody's overworked. But one of the things about the noticing to the neighbors, usually you find people talk about there's not enough noticing, and it looked like the noticing was going to be reduced. And one of the things that I noticed was talking about the glare potential of lighting, because really light pollution is a real thing. And just with the bike paths, I just keep looking at it going, oh my God, when they turn the lights on for the bike paths, that's going to add a lot, I imagine. I don't know, I haven't seen them turned on yet. But I think that's a problem. And then, like Mr. Brinkman said, I think that the second-story additions for decks and for second stories to go, I guess currently it's 150 square feet, but to change 250 square feet is a lot. And especially with so many ADUs and AUDs, actually the ADUs that are really causing I think so much that's coming to the single family. Everybody is really, what's the word? They're territorial of their backyard and their space. And, whatever they're used to is what they're used to. A luxury experience becomes a necessity. So when they lose that view or, their privacy, it's really upsetting to them. And I realize that there's so much pressure from Sacramento to all these because of all these building mandates, that I think is why there's such a large amount of building that we see all over town. We're become the city of cranes. But I think if a lot of it is brought to the city employees, that a lot of it will become rubber stamped just because they're trying to please their bosses and get the projects through, et cetera. And it just won't get what it gets when, like people have said, many of these architects have said, hey, it became a better project with the neighbors' input. So that's my piece. Thank you.
Thank you for that. With that, I think that closes in-person public comment. If anyone else wishes to make an in-person public comment, please fill out a slip and bring it to me. You can bring it to me after. What's your name?
Oh, Karen.
Karen. Okay, and last name?
Lance.
Okay, Ms. Lance, you can approach the podium. You will have 2 minutes to speak.
So excited of all the effort that the city has done to sort of streamline the reduction of projects that need to go in front of SFDB. This is a really great thing considering the cost of construction in the city of Santa Barbara. Neighbor notification is so unnecessary for a new roof, for a small addition. We all know that the right to a view is not protected in the state of California. If you have a home and you need to add square footage, the process is expensive enough because there's so many families that are leaving Santa Barbara because they can't afford to live here. And sometimes that 800 square foot house, they're going to have a baby number 2 and they need to do an addition. But not everybody is got the means to hire the architect to come through this process. It is a delay, and time is money in the city of Santa Barbara. The overreach and the over control of all the projects, I get the new construction, absolutely, but what type of fence you have, and there's a notion that we're protecting how beautiful the city is, and it's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but I've taken a picture of the Riviera with all the beautiful homes, and I replaced the image with all the homes where I'm from, and it looks the same. It's beautiful because of the mountains. It's beautiful because of the ocean. It's not beautiful because we overly control what each individual does on their own property. When you give and you open up to all the neighbors and more neighbors, it just creates this sense of entitlement with your neighbor, the sense of control. And, having gone through it personally, my job to build here is hard enough than to sit and have meetings with my neighbors and tell them everything I'm doing and everything. I don't have the time, and no one is going to pay for that. So these architects are kind of strung through the ringer to try to satisfy these. I've watched all of these meetings, and it breaks my heart for people just trying to build. So I hope we streamline more. I hope we lessen up control. There are other districts in the historic
time
districts
limit
that are
Pardon my
important.
interruption. You've reached your 2-minute timer, but if the board member would like to grant additional time, that's within their purview. Thank you.
You can have one more concise item.
Thank you. One more concise item. We need to figure out ways to make it more affordable to maintain and keep your property in the city of Santa Barbara. And if we make this process too onerous, People will go around you, they already do it, and they do unpermitted work. And unpermitted work is dangerous. They're not getting it inspected. I'm grateful when the inspectors come and check my work. And I am a builder, I'm an architect, and they're catching things on my job, and I'm really grateful for that expertise. We need to encourage this process through the city and streamline it, not make it more onerous. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Lance. With that, if there are any additional public comment, please fill out a slip and bring it to me. I see no one else in the audience making a move to do so, so we will go to virtual comment. At this time, I do not see any hands raised for virtual comment. And we did receive written public correspondence on this particular item from Francis Galt and from Fred Sweeney. So at this, we will turn this back over to you, Chair Lewis.
You guys can continue, I think, before comments. We'll give some time.
All right, thank you. And I just also want to say thanks to all the commenters for providing your input. We really appreciate that. All right, back to the presentation. So SFDB's history, we don't need to go too deep into this. This was covered in the training that we did over the summer. As a reminder, the board was created in 2007. And since then, this would be the first substantive change to the SFDB program since it was created in 2007. And zoning code updates have added design review triggers to SFDB's purview, and the board has seen a lot of projects since then. This was particularly prevalent when Title 30 of the zoning ordinance was adopted. So we're here today to present to you some concepts for some needed adjustments. This initiative is an indirect response to the Novak Group's 2020 report on the city's land development process improvements. One of Novak's recommendations was to eliminate the SFDB or to reassign its duties to streamline and simplify the land development process. We thought that elimination of the board was not something the community would want. Instead, to achieve the streamlining goals, we proposed to amend the municipal code to reduce the number of projects that require design review. Currently, SFDB sees about twice as many applications as HLC and 1.5 times as many as ABR. SFDB takes 2 full-time staffers to process all those projects, and we want to make it manageable for 1 staffer. Note that these numbers just reflect the number of project applications submitted. Each project gets reviewed at a public hearing between 1 and 4 times on average. It makes sense that SFDB reviews so many projects simply because there are far more single-family homes in the city than any other type of building. Single-unit zones, shown in yellow on the map, make up 57% of the city's land area, excluding the airport. The actions and deliverables that will result from this process improvement are code and guideline amendments, an improved applicant experience. We also want to address stakeholder feedback that we received as part of both this specific process improvement effort and as part of the Novak process improvement. And we also want to provide some relief from the sheer volume of projects that the SFDB reviews. We want to relieve staff and the board a little bit. So in early 2023, staff began engaging stakeholders to seek feedback about the SFDB process. We looked at qualitative as well as quantitative data in order to balance the conversation, not just to hear from homeowners and architects, but also to get input from board members who reviewed the projects on a weekly basis. The most resounding feedback we heard from among our outreach groups can be boiled down into these 3 points. First, the board should only focus on the most significant projects, those with a clear potential for neighborhood compatibility issues or privacy issues, such as new houses, large additions, and significant grading and site work. Second, many participants thought that a lot of the projects reviewed at a public hearing could be reviewed and approved by staff administratively instead. This would help fast-track minor projects through the review process. Oh, there we go. So expanding administrative approvals. And lastly, participants felt that the number of design review triggers was too high and that the trigger scope was unnecessarily far-reaching. To look for opportunities to reduce the number of triggers, we reviewed all SFDB applications submitted between July 2019 and June 2022. And within that time period, there were 188 planning applications submitted for full board review and 206 submitted for consent. So that's a total of 394 projects that needed to be reviewed at a public hearing. There were also 271 SFDB administrative applications granted for minor projects during this time. Most of these projects triggered SFDB review simply because of their geographical location in the Hillside Design District. That's this big chunk of the pie over here. Or because of proposed alterations or additions to second stories. That's this chunk here. The remaining projects are triggered by alterations only trigger categories such as fences, re-roofs, decks, etc. So to address this high project load, we propose to eliminate design review triggers not essential to SFDB's purpose. Again, we're not going to go through all of the proposed code amendment concepts. Instead, we want to focus your attention on just the major ones that we want your feedback on. And this is where Exhibit B of the staff report is going to be useful. It lists all the proposed changes to the code, conceptual changes, I should say. And so if there's something in there not covered by this presentation, or something that you want to bring up, please do during the discussion. There will be an opportunity at the end. So before we dive into the triggers, just as a reminder for the board and for members of the public who might be watching, how do design review triggers work? So first, staff verify if SFDB is triggered based on municipal code standards. So these are the code sections in Chapter 2269.020 of the Municipal Code. If SFDB is triggered, staff then determines the level of review. And this starts at administrative, goes up to consent, and then full board, which is where we are today. And this level of review is based on guidance set forth in the SFDB guidelines. And if SFDB is not triggered, then the applicant can go ahead and submit their building a permit application. All right, going into the concepts. At present, any size addition or alteration on a second or higher story triggers SFDB review. You could be doing a 20 square foot addition, you could be doing a 200 or a 2,000 square foot addition. If it's on the second story, currently it requires SFDB review. The proposed code amendments would exempt minor alterations to upper stories and increase the design review threshold for additions to existing upper stories. Larger projects like new second stories on existing one-story houses and major alterations would still require design review under the proposed concepts. This is our working definition of a major alteration. So any physical modification to a structure or site that involves a major portion of the structure or has a substantial visual impact on the structure or its surroundings as determined by the director. As an example, you can see on the right, we have the architectural style changing completely, even though the footprint of the overall house isn't changing a whole lot. So some other examples include changing to building massing, cladding the exterior walls in a new material, extensive replacement or enlargement of doors and windows, new, modified, or disparate architectural elements on the project that result in a different architectural style. So these are our proposed design review triggers. Again, these are just concepts for multi-story buildings. So 1 and 2 aren't changing from the current code. These are being maintained. Currently, a new multi-story main building or accessory building requires SFDB. And for 2, a new second or higher story on an existing main or accessory building requires design review. So if you're putting in, kind of a major 2-story project, that needs design review. Number 3, we're increasing the threshold of additions from any size, AKA like a 20 square foot addition. We're making that threshold 250 square feet to an existing second or higher story. So this is where there's already second story massing. We're saying you can do up to 250 square feet and not require design review. And 4, major alterations, as we previously described, to existing multi-story main or accessory buildings. And this is currently a design review trigger. It's just not explicit in the code, so we're making it explicit here. On to Hillside Design District concepts, and we'll have a chance to discuss these in a moment here. As previously noted, about half of all SFDB's projects are triggered under the Hillside Design Review District, Hillside Design District and Sloped Lots category. Under current code, those triggers are any building and site alterations, and any size of addition on lots over 20% slope. So when we looked back at the data, we realized that most of these projects in the hillside are actually pretty small. And the hillside is this purple area here for your reference. So since those projects are minor, a lot of those projects are minor, staff considers those to be the largest opportunities for cutting down on design review projects at a public hearing. Our proposed triggers are pretty similar to the multi-story triggers. 1 and 2, these are currently triggered under the current code. So construction of a new house in the hillside requires design review. And construction of a new accessory building greater than 250 square feet is currently triggered. Actually, what's currently triggered is a new accessory building of any size that requires a building permit. We want to raise that threshold to 250 square feet. So small accessory buildings like sheds could be potentially exempt from design review. We also want to increase the size of an addition that's triggered to 250 square feet from any size addition, and incorporate the major alterations trigger. All right, so here's our first opportunity for questions. And go ahead and read it. So do you support the idea of eliminating SFDB design review triggers for minor alterations and small additions up to 250 square feet? And this would apply to multi-story buildings and sites within the Hillside Design District.
Okay. I think what we might do is always start in the same order. That might just be helpful. So if we start on this end with Board Member Kloss.
Okay, so this was a 161-page document that we got on Thursday. There was a lot of information, and the summaries were very helpful, which are appreciated. And so in some instances, I continue to be a little bit confused about where these things cross-pollinate, and so part of my comments may be related to that confusion or the need for clarity in those areas. So bear with me. So I don't really have a conceptual issue with 250 square feet. Okay, it's basically, 15 by 15, right? It's smaller than a 2-car garage. The problem in my mind with this, or my concern rather, is that, for example, if we have, let's say we have a 1,200 square foot house that has a 600 square foot second floor already on it, and now we're adding 250 square feet to it, and it sits within the FAR guidelines, we've almost created, like just a 2-story box, right? So I don't know how we codify this in a way where we are still ensuring quality design if this becomes a ministerial item where we just allow the 250. So part of the comments that I have down here are that if we did this, at minimum, we would need to ensure that those additions still met our current guidelines that are enumerated on page 40-TS of our guidelines, which illustrate compatible style and stepping back from side yards of the first floor. And my other concern would be that if this 250 square foot addition is part of a complete exterior alteration, I think you've already addressed that, but I would want to make sure that that was still a trigger. So that is my comment about this particular.
Can I add to your item that a good
Item.
reference point may be 42 TS and the ones that are being indicated in our guidelines as not okay, kind of then give you that full box.
Sure. It's both the positive and the negatives, right? Yeah. So that's my initial reaction to this item. I think conceptually, it's not a lot of square footage. And so it's not the square footage itself that concerns me. It's the cumulative effect of adding that to something that may already exist that could create an issue.
And maybe just for facilitation purposes, Board Member Kloss, you just mentioned the additions. Could you also speak to the minor alterations and your reactions to that? And we can kind of break it up that way as well.
I don't have any problem with, like, for example, the replacement of windows or I'm trying to think of other minor alterations, I don't know, the addition of a trellis or maybe some landscaping improvements or things like that. In Hillside District, what I've observed around town is that there are a lot of people who are going, okay, we're going to replace our windows, and now we're going to replace our siding, and now we're going to replace our roofing, and all of a sudden, we have a new house. And that is essentially circumventing the intent, as I understand it, of some of our current triggers. And so, again, how do we codify minor alterations, and how do we capture the cumulative effect of a number of them on one unit or one residence? And I've seen that where, people dig into a project on the Riviera and they go, oh, we're going to replace our windows, and now, oh, we have dry rot, so now we have to take the siding off, and oh, well, while we're at it, we might as well do the roofing. And I mean, I'll speak very frankly, there are people who operate in any profession, people operate different ways within every profession. And one can use exceptions to circumvent intent, or you can be forthright and upfront with it. So this idea that we've had historically in town of anything that has occurred on a parcel for the last 2 to 3 years is kind of rolled up and reviewed and considered as part of the work that's being done on a project now, that might be a point of departure for addressing some of these concerns. If somebody needs to replace windows because their house is leaking or because they're going to get better energy results from it, more power to them. Or the siding is in horrible condition and I want to do plaster instead of wood because I can't handle the maintenance on it. I get all that, but when all of a sudden they're using those as opportunities to completely revamp and change something that sits in a neighborhood that is compatible currently along with 250 square feet of an addition, then it becomes a concern for me.
Board Member Anderson?
So I apologize if I missed, what decisions are we making today?
Just here on this overall?
I mean,
There are no decisions today. This is just a conceptual level. This is only a discussion item. No actions will be taken. This is
Okay.
really just to get comments, and then
Right.
we will be, again, Ted will be going through this towards the end of our presentation, but we'll be able to follow up with the Planning Commission with the same kind of discussion item. But we want to make sure that they understand kind of how is the board reacting to this? Because this is the first time you've kind of dealt with concepts
Right.
together.
okay, so, I'm generally in support of item 1. The administrative part, I question, is it a planner or an architect that's reviewing the minor alterations and the small additions? And I'm assuming that there would be checklists and/or definitions of, I mean, this is the hard part about minor and major alterations and additions, to define the difference of those. So those are my, I guess, questions and/or concerns around allowing the elimination.
Okay, Board Member Graffiti.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think generally I'm in support of eliminating some of these triggers for the minor alterations and small additions. I think having clarity around the checklist, how we define matching, what's currently there is important. And then I'm less familiar with this, but if somebody were to do this right after they got, a project approval or in project, would this type of process still apply, or is there a certain timeline between? I know we've had projects before where we're really mindful of the bulk and scale and approved at 84%, and then somebody obviously can go and do an ADU, which is fine and within their right, but then it makes a box that we might not have necessarily approved because of the bulk and scale. So my only question would be, if we made an exception, 250 is pretty minor, but is this a process that somebody could follow as they're getting PDA or final or going through a new development or not? I think that could be, I don't know, something worth discussing. That's it.
We're commenting on just number 1 right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm the first one to, you guys know me, I would be one of the first ones to say that any way we can streamline the process, as an architect, I would want to do that. However, I think we need to be really careful how we do it, because even an addition of 50 square feet, if done in the wrong way, could be really catastrophic to a project. So it goes back to our initial conversations about how we could go about doing this. And I keep saying that, and I'll say it again, that if staff isn't sure or doesn't have the ability, it doesn't have the comfort level or the I don't know what you call it, experience to distinguish what's important and what's not, they could bring in a member of the board, the chair or the vice chair, which would be the person that, probably has the most experience to decide. Because if you could do a 400 square foot addition on the back of a house that nobody would see, that's under a fence, that might be completely appropriate and not be able to, not have to be reviewed by the board. But even a 50 square foot addition in the wrong place on the front of a house could deem immediately a project kind of incompatible with the neighborhood, in my opinion, from a stylistic standpoint. Just.
Yeah, I'm thinking, in general, I do really support and agree with streamlining the process. And I agree with what's been said. I think what would be most helpful is identifying what is minor versus major. And then also, I think even in the minor scope of, what are compatible materials or items that are included in that. If I'm doing a re-roof, when that comes to our board and it's perfectly fine, and we're like, okay, well, that was a waste of our time, that's great. But when they come in and it's a drastic change and it doesn't work, then it's like technically the description is the same, but that's where all of a sudden it's, completely changed something, or the color is vastly different. And so I'd wonder how best to explain that to the applicants and to be able to streamline that. Another question that I'm not sure if it's part of this or ahead, but you showed the map of everything that's included. And when we're looking at streamlining what projects come to us, is there any discussion of what that zone of importance is? We've talked about that the consensus from the public is that major projects come here. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but we get projects sometimes nobody can see. It's completely screened, nobody can see it. And you're like, why are we commenting on this? So I'm just curious if there's ways to indicate certain properties or areas that it's not impacting the public, and that's the main portion of our feedback. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point because, Mr. Sweeney, who's in the audience, he might be able to weigh in on that. But for some reason, in the back of my mind, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, for some reason, I think that when projects used to be triggered to go to ABR, the precursor to single family, that if an applicant could show that the residence or the project that was proposed is not visible from anywhere, it was exempt from design review. And I don't know if I'm remembering that in the city or in the county, or maybe Mr. Sweeney recalls that.
That was the county for sure.
But, and I think that's a good point, because there are some larger parcels that we review houses on, and it's like, I don't care if it's 20,000 square feet and it's purple. No one's ever going to see it unless we cut it down, and there's always the dilemma of what happens when the next owner comes in. So there's always that to be considered, but I don't know, perhaps Fred could weigh in on that from a historical standpoint.
And that would be determined by the chair. I'm going to jump into my advisory mode.
Thank you for your advisory mode. If it stays under a minute and a half, I think that'd be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You as chair do have control over these meetings, and you can extend the time period. You have that authority. And you can address anyone in the audience that you wish to speak to. So just keep that in mind.
Thanks.
Because of the Robert Rules of Order that this board works under. With regard to this issue, I think in a bigger context, what you need to think about is the ABR and the HLC have very different purview objectives of why they were established and what they look at. They're the people that are looking at the poetry of the city. I use that word because they use that word a lot. They look at how Santa Barbara looks, and one of the speakers talked about that earlier. Your job is a different kind of job. We're not here to determine that the style or the architecture is in graceful connection with the Spanish heritage that we all value about Santa Barbara. It's here to look at that issue of, can it be seen? Now, I can tell you from my experience on this board, there was never a project that cannot be seen. Even the time that I thought we had one up on the backside of the Riviera, we ended up with 3 neighbors here saying, no, we can see it through the oak trees and we don't like the color or whatever it was. So you can't approach it from that point, but you can approach it from the public viewpoint. The challenge you have is we have many projects that can be seen from the street and the public right away and can't be seen other than maybe adjacent neighbors. But there are a ton of, and that's that big purple area of the map that Ted showed you earlier, that you can see from all over the city. And so does it have an effect on what we see? And I know there was a speaker talking about we enjoy the mountains, et cetera, and we don't really pay attention to the buildings. But I can tell you we do. So that's a big challenge, and I think that's the challenge of how we've defined the upper hillside districts. And maybe that's not been clear to a lot of folks. Why is it that area and not this area? So that gets into how you look at it. It's a much different task than the ABR or the HLC.
Yeah, thank you.
If I may,
That's a good point.
to the chair. So just a couple of points, and I really want to, again, this is kind of a listening session, so we're going to be taking lots of notes, and you might have some questions that we can answer, but I really want to be clear for design review triggers that we need to establish, and this is probably more for your comment, Board Member Sherry, where we have to establish first and foremost, does a project trigger design review? That really needs to be as objective as possible, or it needs to be as clear as possible. in order to assess, okay, are they going to require a planning application? And then once we've established that SFDB design review is triggered, that's when we can say, okay, what level of design review is warranted? And is staff the appropriate review, or would we prefer to move this up to a public hearing where we would prefer the board to review or a consent reviewer to do that at a public hearing? So again, I just want to put in context, we're talking just about the threshold of does this require design review, and then we'll have to establish level of design review for that. So again, it's really more about how we can make this as easy as possible. And Chair Lewis, to your point of, do applicants understand what this means? Do they want to design either to avoid it, or they understand what the rules of engagement are with, okay, I'm doing this, and so here's my threshold, and I understand that this triggers design review. And then thinking about it, how it comes in for staff, of can we easily assess, yes or no, is this going to trigger SFDB review? So first we establish there's a trigger, and then we can assess level of design review from there. So just a little context of like when we talk about triggers to kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
I do want to say, I do think Dawn has a good point of we're on board with minor and some of these things, but just because the footprint's small doesn't mean it's less impactful. So potentially, if we're still open to discussion around the square footage, where is it sited and what type of addition or, accessory dwelling unit or whatever accessory unit it is. I don't have like the answer of exactly what I would think that should be, but I think you have a really good point about how is that being used and where is it?
Yeah, I think Board Member Sherry's comment about it being in the front of the house or, I think we've already stated if it changes the architectural language, I think it's a fair distinguishing character as well. Okay.
And Chair Lewis, if I could address Board Member Graffiti's and Colossus question regarding cumulative changes, I think that was something that a few of you brought up actually. There is currently a design review trigger that is hard to read. It's got a lot of legalese in it. I think it's toward the bottom of your Exhibit B. It's the presumption regarding prior grading, site work, et cetera. That design review trigger indicates that any project or any work done on the site that's done 2 years before or 2 years after a project will be considered in determining whether design review is required for the total project. So that trigger essentially is there to try to address piecemealing of projects, and we're not proposing to change that trigger. We are proposing to change the wording to make it a little more concise, but not to actually change it.
Yes.
All right, second question here. A little bit easier than the first question probably. So do you support maintaining a design review trigger for major alterations?
Yes.
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 An easy one.
And I think to add on to that, it sounds like there's consensus here. But I think it would be helpful, I don't know if we want to go back to the definition, kind of our working definition, or things that you want to comment about the major alterations and examples of that, or combinations of things. Because the way that we see projects, it's not just, people don't come in generally for just one thing. It's a mix of things. We're like, oh, well, if I'm going to do this, I might do that. So we'd love to hear if there are any additional thoughts on that.
The one comment there, your third item, extensive replacement or enlargement of windows and doors. I think an extra kind of descriptor there of what that replacement is. We had a project come in here. They replaced all the windows. Great. I think a checklist of what those materials are, if it's like for like and close enough, that it doesn't need our review in that language. Any other comments?
Maybe for replacement, I think enlargement of windows and doors is a little more subjective, but I think, yeah, I agree with the replacement. For the other comments, I'm fine.
So I was looking through item B, and down at the bottom here, you've referred to the working definition of a major alteration. which you've noted as being any physical modification to a structure or site that involves a major portion of the structure or has a substantial visual impact on the structure or its surroundings as determined by the community development director. So this to me is not an objective standard. What it's doing is it's placing the subjectivity in the hands of the community development director rather than this board. That's all that's doing, in my mind. So there are some examples enumerated after that statement. Changes to building massing, cladding the exterior walls. I think that is the concern, is how do we drill down on really what constitutes a major change or a major addition. And I don't know how we do that. Do we go, if you're changing more than 10% of the square footage of the fenestration, okay, now we have a numerical value that we can place upon that. Or if you are completely changing the exterior siding, or whatever it is, and I don't want to make suggestions, I'm just trying to use examples. But it seems like those need to be codified in a more objective manner, because just to say that it's as determined by the community development director, I mean, frankly, it's fodder for subjectivity and preferential treatment, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to get away from here. So that's my concern.
Chair Lewis, if I may, to Board Member Kalas, we recognize that the language here is pretty subjective, and I think our goal would be to provide some sort of objective criteria for defining major alterations. This is just our working definition for now, and we would appreciate your and the board's feedback on some suggestions for making
And how to quantify that.
more objective criteria, and that could be a certain number of types of alterations, like if you're replacing all of your doors and windows, or a certain kind of percentage on the house, in addition to a re-roof and a change in the exterior cladding. You know, we want to hear from you on what that looks like.
And just for context, the way it's currently written is any alteration, any addition, 1 square foot addition triggers design review. Any a change of paint to, these are, so it goes from being very clear to, okay, if we're going to reduce the number of projects and we're going to try to, again, if there's general consensus of letting go of minor alterations, how do we define major alterations? How do we define minor alterations? And there is a lot of, every day, I just want to remind the board that we're making assessments of what can be administratively approved, what do we send to the board. Staff tend to be more conservative because we know how much people care about their neighbors and what's going on. So I think that, we have to provide some kind of language of a community development director, that's part of our working definition because it's, generally assessed. But as Mr. Hamilton-Roll was mentioning, that, any guidance, if we want to explain major alterations, that would be where your feedback would be most valued, of how can we explain this? Because all of this would likely go into our single family design board guidelines and be resolved with that in addition to the code amendment. So that's how this could potentially play out. So this is part of the conversation.
One thing that comes to mind is I think that this goes back to lots of comments that were received by the public, but also what is the point of our board, and even giving us clear direction on that too, in our guidelines, and the varying degrees that people on this board have felt about architectural styles and that changing. And I think that that's one of the things that comes up on these renovations is what tends to happen to that style. Well, to what extent is that in our purview? And to what extent is that the importance of this board? And I think more direction for us and for the community would be helpful for everyone involved. Yeah. Because if there's a style and is the intent that it has to stay the style that the house already is, if not, that opens it up to what is considered a minor alteration if it has to, and these are things that are a little fluid in our guidelines right now.
And that harkens back to Mr. Sweeney's comment about what is compatibility and how to better define that, right?
Okay. And just a quick note on that, so there's a lot included in this project that we're not going to get to today. Part of that is updates to the guidelines. And in the very front cover of your SFDB General Design Guidelines, you'll see the purpose and goals of the SFDB. We've taken a stab at revising those based on feedback that we've heard. And so that'll be later on in the fall. I'll get to that later. But be thinking about that as we continue through.
And I think I would just lastly follow up on that is, when this was created, there was a lot, ABR was the first group to really, we introduced the concept of single-family residences and finally having a trigger for design review for single-family residents, aside from historic resources that were always under the purview of the Historic Landmarks Commission. But SFDB was, a lot of the move to putting single-family projects on ABR was really a lot to start off with protecting the hillside and kind of the views and kind of maintaining a certain scenic characteristic, as you're familiar with your findings. And then following, there was a 3-year process to look at FAR and the mass and the bulk and how does that impact neighborhoods and the whole McMansionization of what was happening. And that was a result of those 2007, the creation of the Single Family Design Board. So I think with any of these proposals or concepts, we're not trying to imminently change the SFDB. We want to make sure that there's still a public forum over, large projects or, things that might have an impact to the neighborhood. It is in your guidelines that style, there is not one style that SFDB is responsible. You get architects and designers who come in with every kind of style imaginable, and you're assessing as your guidelines show, there's lots of ways to assess scale and bulk and, kind of patterns of development. But again, just to reassure for you and probably more so for members of the public, there is no one architectural style, and that makes it tricky. And thinking about, again, how do we think about triggers when you introduce new styles as part of an addition? Is how much do we need to warrant, like how much is okay versus, okay, this goes beyond and we would like to have more aesthetic oversight over that.
Yeah, because that's the one thing in the guidelines right now is that the house can choose to be any style as long as it's compatible with the neighborhood, which needs some further definition of compatible. But the other thing is that it has to be a cohesive style. And so that's where the pain point starts happening with alterations, is if I have a very clear style here, but I've added something outside of it, that's something that in our review would be called upon. So, yeah. Any other comments for these items? Otherwise, I think we can move to the next one.
So this is what you're proposing, or this is current as you view major alterations? What's on the screen right now?
Our concept for kind of thinking about it and kind of as a conversation starter for you all to react to.
See, item 3 on here, just for feedback's sake, I think you can completely replace your windows and doors if they're like for like. I don't see why that would need to be a major alteration.
I think it's if I may jump in, the replacement, or I'm sorry, the enlargement of windows we see a lot of privacy issues with windows in our observations at public hearings. And when we see people come in they want to request administrative approval for alterations, and we see really big windows and we say, time out, we're sending you to the board.
Yeah, I think the enlargement for sure. And then I think, the only other comment that we tend to have is if the style dictates something that typically has divided lights, and then they've come in with super modern, and that I think triggers the change in architectural style of the house. But I think the like for like are somewhat similar, and that's where I think it would be helpful for owners to have a range of what they're still allowed to do in the like for like, that it, in their replacement of things.
Yeah, so it's okay if it's a double hung that's vinyl clad instead of wood, but it still has to be double hung, and it still has to have the same general breakup of light patterns or something like that that matches the existing style, right? That would be exempted from this trigger for a major alteration.
That's correct. That's the idea we have.
Yeah, okay.
All right, shall we move forward? Okay. All right, so the conversation about style is a good segue into the special design districts. In contrast to the Hillside Design District, the Mission Area Design District, which is shown here in green, if I can get my mouse to go, there we go, triggered only 8 projects for SFDB review between 2019 and 2022. And the Lower Riviera Special Design District, shown here in red, triggered 0 projects. Years ago, the Mission Area Design District was established to protect the aesthetics of the area directly surrounding the Mission, which is right here. And the Lower Riviera District was established to protect the craftsman bungalows that often occur in this area here. These 2 districts can be viewed as placeholders created to protect historically sensitive neighborhoods while historic structure survey work was being done. Now that the survey work is complete and ongoing refinements are being made, the historic structures in these districts are in the historic resources inventory and are not under SFDB purview. They go to HLC. The architectural historian, Nicole Hernandez, supports these concepts given the needed survey work has been done. So to reduce the confusion around these outdated design districts, we propose to remove them as SFDB triggers and replace them with the project scope specific triggers that we've discussed. Again, larger triggers or larger projects like a new second story, significant grading and site work, and major alterations in the hillside or to a 2-story house would still trigger SFDB reviews citywide. And near the top of the most frequently used SFDB triggers is upper story decks. Although they're a great way to enjoy Santa Barbara's sunny weather, decks can have privacy impacts if not cited in consideration of neighbors. So to reduce the number of minor deck projects reviewed at SFDB, a design review exception is proposed for decks that are 15 feet from any interior lot line and under 200 square feet. This is in line with the guideline stating that decks should be located at least 15 feet from any interior lot line. And this 15-foot exception concept received strong support in our focus groups. All right, so we'd like your feedback on these questions or these concepts at this point. First question, do you generally support rewriting the SFDB triggers to only trigger projects that are likely to have the biggest impact to adjacent properties and the surrounding neighborhood? And this would be things like second-story additions, new multi-story residences, or major alterations.
Board Member Kloss, I'm going to start with you.
Well, it's interesting because we just went from a couple pretty specific recommendations or ideas to sort of a general question about triggers here.
This is more, this is related to those particular areas. So again, we're trying to remove the special design district of the Mission area, which was just kind of a generic, like drawing of a circle to say, okay, we just want to protect this area around the Mission. You can see the little orange and blue dots within the green. Those are all designated historic resources. Or something that's on the historic resource inventory. So within this same band of green and within the same band of red down below for the Lower Riviera, it's just the question of, rather than just anything in those areas, just anything that you do, any alteration, any addition, that it goes back to the same kinds of triggers
Right,
for
and it goes,
and
yeah,
that's
defaults
whether or
to
not.
those,
So,
yeah.
so that's really essentially what we're asking for these scope specific triggers for these design districts.
I think I can generally support that. The 200 square feet on a second level it may be a little large, but, I mean, we had a perfect example on today's on today's agenda, right, where it was a relatively small deck. Again, that wasn't 15 feet away from side yard, but it was relatively diminutive, and it was a concern. So, but generally speaking, yes, I can support the removal of these two districts and those being a trigger onto themselves.
Board Member Anderson? So this is specific to the zones.
Right, and if they go to HLC, they're going to take a look. So, I mean, yeah, generally I'm in support of, yeah.
Okay, great. Graffiti?
Yes, I'm in support of that.
Thank you. Board Member Sherry? Perfect, me too.
Thank you, moving on. And this is specifically regarding the deck design review trigger.
Yes.
Do you support the exception for upper story decks further than 15 feet from any interior lot line?
And I'll start with that. As long as our guidelines remain the same, I think that's in support of our guideline and normally what we dictate them as well. So I think if it meets our requirements and that's the only work that they're doing or other minor work, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Class? Board Member Class?
I'm just thinking about how many people could be on a 200 square foot deck. That's what I'm sitting over here thinking about right now. And so, yeah, I agree with the 15-foot guideline.
Mm-hmm.
The current threshold is what, 21 square feet for an upper balcony or?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there could be a sweet spot somewhere between the two.
I'd be open to that. Board Member Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, I would love the definition, what it ends up being. We can get into the details later, but, I mean, I'm generally good with it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just ask for an additional piece of clarification, one thing that we didn't put in this trigger was considerations for decks that are above a second story or roof decks. And I'm not sure if that's...
I think those well, in my opinion, I think those may continue some level of review
Okay.
when it comes to privacy of the neighboring residences. One thing we also didn't mention, I think even with these decks that are 15 feet away, generally our board also likes some amount of privacy screening, whether that's on the balcony itself or with hedges, and I don't know how that gets incorporated in there.
This is a good question, Chair Lewis. So I think we kept it simple, just to say 15 feet and from the interior lot lines and, you know, again, have a square footage established. But if, you know, again, the more it needs to be as objective as possible. And so we've seen projects where it meets the 15-foot guideline and you haven't required any kind of screening. And then we've seen projects where, okay, the neighbor comes in and all of a sudden we've got a 5-foot wall that adds bulk and, kind of a visual bulk to this. So it's a question for you all as to whether or not you would want to add some kind of screening. Again, this has to be this is a trigger, so it has to be assessed.
Streamline, then it's got to be more specific.
Can you describe screening? Like, are you talking about screening of the deck?
Wall.
We're talking about like a fin
as
on
the
the side.
responsibility of the applicant?
That if we're looking to include an exception to SFDB design review, meaning that an applicant can come and propose something, and if it meets the exception, and they don't have to come to SFDB for review, if you want to add screening, what would that be, and where would, that's
my question. What do you mean by screening?
Screening could be, generally we describe it as, kind of some kind of opaque walls or something that, there's all kinds of design, planters, landscaping.
No, I'm opposed to that.
So I would be in support, so I'm thinking of a standard lot, okay, and this varies once we get up onto the Riviera. Typical lot's 50 feet wide, right? So if we've got 15 feet on one side, 15 feet, we were left over with 20 feet, right? So if you're putting a deck up there and it's 20, and you're taking advantage of that full 20-foot width, it seems to me like a 6-foot deep deck is substantial enough. That's 120 square feet. So in my mind, if we reduce that 200 square feet to 120 and said it's got to abide by the 15 feet on both sides, then it doesn't have to have screening. That's my, initial gut reaction to that. I don't think a deck needs to be 10 feet.
Sorry
No,
to interrupt.
I'm sorry, the screening is more that generally sometimes we'll bring that up. I think if they add screening, that is normally a design thing that we need to look at, if it's an architectural feature, and being very clear of what's determined in here.
I think I misunderstood. I think that what you were talking about is whether do we add the terminology of if it's screened.
Oh, that it would,
then
oh,
it
got
would
it.
be exempt. I would be opposed to that
Correct.
because
Yeah.
I don't think some balconies should be screened.
Agreed.
I think if you're like.
I agree. I think it
Agreed.
could add
Yeah.
to the bulk or the mass of, it could change the,
And I also think when we've required that or asked for that in the past, it is when it is within the 15 feet.
Correct.
Or the way that it's cited. It just depends completely on the neighbor and what's next door. And, we've seen projects recently where there's like two, it depends, so. But typically when we've asked for screening, it's been when it's below 15 and we're making an exception.
So I could support it if it were reduced to 120 square feet. And then it would just be, it wouldn't require, it wouldn't trigger anything.
I'd be curious to hear how others think, or if you want to do a straw poll or kind of the.
Are we still?
If you're concerned about the square footage, yeah, 250 square foot deck.
Oh, it's
or-
200,
Sorry,
200.
thank you. 200 square foot balcony, or is there a different threshold that would
I
remove
mean,
the
right
trigger
now
in your
it's
mind?
21 square feet and 15 feet. And
Yeah,
so what
to
we're
go from
saying was,
21 to 200 is, right now, is exempt.
it's
But,
basically like a reasonable sized
little-
Juliet balcony or
Right.
something.
I thought that was if it was closer than 15 feet.
No, I think it still has to maintain the 15.
Currently, the design review trigger is for any decks that are greater than 3 feet by 7 feet on a second or higher story.
Irregardless of location, yeah.
So I definitely agree making it larger than that, the 3 by 7, but I do agree that the 200 is quite large, so I'm open to other considerations.
To me, it's hard to answer because it goes back to that style, compatibility. and I don't-
Neighbors, I mean, I think it could be potentially defined further as we get into more of the details. I don't know that so for me, it's like, is there public comment, neighbor concern, right? And that's why I always want to see the adjacent neighbor properties and the residents and positions, because that's where the concern comes up with the privacy, where we would potentially require the solid walls.
But what they're saying is, if we changed this to what is being proposed, you can build a 200 square foot deck on a second floor level as long as it's 15 feet away, and it's not going to trigger. So that whole issue of neighbors is bye-bye, as I understand it.
Yeah, and I think the general consensus that we tend to discuss is if a balcony is for 1 to 2 people to sit out there, and it's sized for that, then it's less of a concern at 15 feet away looking at the neighbor. If privacy is one of the things that we're supposed to look at in our guidelines, and right now it still is, it being a larger size, even though it's 15 feet away, becomes a group activity of people observing next door and creating noise and creating a different thing. So I think if it can fully meet what's in our guidelines, however our guidelines might change.
Well, this is just for the threshold.
Right,
So I think what I'm hearing is that maybe a reduced size, that 200 might be a little large and you all might have more concerns. And I'm paraphrasing here. But again, I'm based on 120. Is that a realm that you think would be more comfortable in terms of establishing a threshold for an exception, and then anything above that would be triggering SFDB design review.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yeah, because that's the two people, you know, it's a couple of chairs or a couple of chairs.
And then we didn't get back to Mr. Hamilton's question about roof decks.
Oh.
So I don't know that you actually asked a question. You just suggested that you wanted to touch upon that.
I think it's a good question to bring up. It's something that,
Keeps coming up more and more.
yeah, it comes up frequently. And the question is whether this exception should include roof decks or not. Because the way it's currently written, the concept is that a roof deck even would not trigger SFDB review if it meets the 15-foot and now 120-foot square foot threshold.
I personally think that any podium, deck, patio, roof deck, name it what you will, if it's above a second floor level, it should trigger design review. So if it's on the roof of a second floor, it should trigger. I think you're starting to get tall. I think it's more likely there's going to be privacy issues. That's my own personal opinion.
Thoughts over here?
I think, I mean, this whole privacy issue is, you guys know how I feel about it. I think that when you start dictating and changing window sill heights due to whether or not an applicant can see into a neighbor's yard, it's getting dangerous. And I think that privacy is better addressed by good fences and good hedges between neighbors instead of changing architecture.
You can't do that when it's on the roof of a second floor level and still meet the hedge ordinance. You can't do that.
With what you were saying about the second floor and above triggering it, I just think that in general, this privacy issue deserves more discussion, and not today, because we get a lot of neighbors that come in and say, I don't want this neighbor who's building this house, I don't want them to be able to look into my yard. But what if they're building a contemporary house? And what if it's all glass? Then the neighbor
I
could,
agree that
you
that's
know,
part of the next
Yeah, it's like another
discussion.
issue.
It's something that would be helpful in our guidelines of further defining privacy that we are trying to protect. And I do agree with Board Member Colossa's statement of if it's on the just above a first story, I think should still fit the guidelines of this being a deck, if it meets the other requirements of the balcony. Any other comments?
No, I agree with Board Member Colossus that if it's above the second story, it should not be exempt. It should be triggered. I didn't disagree with that.
Okay, great.
Well, the privacy issue is just, it's like the private view issue. It's just tough, right? It's tough because everybody wants to be able to own their own domain, so to speak, right? I mean, and not worry about somebody being able to look in but we also have blinds and it's hard. It's hard.
Well, I think the good neighbor guidelines, right, with them would need to be adjusted.
Agreed. I think that's a later comment. So I think we've got consensus here for roof deck needing to come to design review unless it's on the top of a first story.
One-story residence. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, we are nearing the end here. We have mailed noticing concepts and then a couple of Title 30 proposed concepts to go over. So thanks for hanging in there. All right, so under current code, not all projects require a mailed notice. The projects that do require a mailed notice also require a public hearing. So our proposed changes aim to maintain the mailed noticing requirement for larger projects and to remove it for minor projects. And this would allow staff to do more administrative approvals on those minor projects. So this chart summarizes what is proposed. Up top, these three noticing triggers are being maintained. So a new main building, a 500 square foot addition, that also counts for an accessory building that's 500 square feet or greater, or a new second or higher story on an existing building. All of those currently require a notice, and we're proposing to maintain that. We have a change here. Currently, 150 square foot addition to an existing second or higher story needs a notice. We want to increase that threshold to 250 square feet, just to give a little bit more flexibility on what can be administratively approved. Say the addition is not publicly visible, it's in the rear. We want to be able to not have to notice that. Also for grading, the current noticing trigger is 250 cubic yards of grading outside the main building footprint. We want to increase that threshold to 500 cubic yards.
I have a quick general question. So these are public hearing. So are these still options that if they're going to come to a board meeting, that they would not then get noticed? Or if they have a board meeting for one of these, if you go next to the next page, yeah. So if they...
If the project scope is any one of the things on the left, that will, then staff have to prepare a mailed notice,
Right.
and the applicant has to pay for
Yeah.
that. But if you don't, if your scope of work doesn't trigger any of the thresholds, then there's no, it still may require a public hearing. I mean, we always assess, first we establish, does this project trigger design review? If yes, does this project trigger a mailed notice? And some do and some don't. And we'll still, you know, it could be, right now, our hands are tied that we can't administratively
yes.
approve all things
Okay.
because
Is
when they
there a way,
trigger a
though,
notice.
that if they stay here and don't trigger a general notice, can still be added to have a notice? And I saw that staff may still
Yeah,
decide.
We'll get to that
Okay.
point.
Okay.
Yes, great question.
Thanks.
I'm realizing it might have been helpful to have an intro slide on how noticing operates, but it's for members of the public listening. A mailed notice gets sent to the people within 300 feet of the project site if one of the noticing thresholds on the screen is met. And all right, so we are proposing to change these three at the bottom. Currently, triggers or notices are required for projects proposing a minor zoning exception. We'll get to minor zoning exceptions shortly. We have some other proposed changes that will affect potentially your views on this. Exterior lighting with glare potential, we're proposing to remove the noticing requirement for that. Reasoning for that is typically projects that involve exterior lighting with a glare potential are already noticed. They tend to be new houses, large additions, things of that nature. If there was a new sport court, like a tennis court that's going in, that's not even allowed to have bright lighting in a residential zone, so you're not going to see that. And so we think it doesn't get used a lot, and we think it's a good candidate for removal here. The last change we're proposing is to remove the noticing requirement for the uncovered parking spaces exception that the zoning ordinance outlines. Typically, these projects are fairly easy to approve. They're a rubber stamp historically with the board. We'd like to give staff the ability to review some of the more minor requests for uncovered parking spaces. Typically, they just involve screening for cars, so it's not too impactful. But we'd still have the option to notice projects that we think might have a neighborhood impact. So with that.
Thanks. Would you mind,
if
for
I
this
could
question,
just-
going to the other slide while we...
I do want to point out that there's always a discretion of staff. If something triggers design review, it may not trigger a mailed notice in addition, but we kind of know it when we see it. And if there's something problematic, we can say, all right, we're going to send a mailed notice because we know that this is going to bother people. We know that this is a sensitive area. We know that whatever they're proposing could be challenge, that there could be some kind of concern or that might warrant the board's aesthetic your expertise to weigh in. So we can say, all right, we think that we're going to request a mailed notice regardless. So yes, these are the triggers, but this doesn't prevent us. So I think, Chair Lewis, this is your question. So it doesn't prevent us from being able to say, yes, we're going to do a mailed notice for this.
Because in my opinion, I think if something is deemed worthy enough to go in front of the whole board, I think that a notice to the neighbors is important for us to be able to hear genuine public comment and to give that opportunity. But I think the point of this is to help you identify things that don't need to come to the full board. And in that case, especially if they're very minor and normally don't have comments from neighbors, it will help cut down on time and cost and people involved. That's my opinion. Board Member Collas, do you have thoughts?
I generally agree with that. I was starting to think through the minor zoning exception item, and it sounds like you guys have some thoughts on that already. Like a trash enclosure in a front yard, I really don't see why anybody would take exception to that. Like, wouldn't everybody like to see the trash covered? But if we start talking about an exception to, hedges on a common property line, or, a couple weeks ago, we had a project up on the Riviera, and they were proposing something along, I think it was on Los Alturas, where it was a hedge that was going to exceed 42 inches, and we all thought about that, and it's like, well, this is going to impact public views down into town, and that could have potentially been non-noticed if it were approved through a minor zoning exception. So I really kind of think it depends on the nature of the MZE.
I have one question about, if it's okay to ask, about the second to last item that says exterior lighting with glare potential. I'm trying to think of an example of an exterior light that would be proposed that meets the night sky compliance that still has glare potential. What would that be an example of?
Board Member Sherry, so there is a whole chapter in the municipal code on outdoor lighting, and a lot of the concerns that I think this noticing trigger would address are addressed by that code section. There's a whole enforcement process if there is a light that is shining on someone else's property. That's called light trespass, and the city can go out and inspect for that on a complaint basis. And so that with that without addressed in the code, we felt that it wasn't really important to.
I guess my question is, if somebody's proposing a non-dark sky compliant fixture, it's not going to make it past staff anyway. So what would be an example of an exterior light that meets dark sky compliance but still has glare potential? Because the whole purpose for dark sky compliance is to eliminate glare potential.
This is the challenge.
think of
It's
one.
really, this barely, I don't know if we had a single, we didn't have this. I know we're talking about mailed notice requirements, but also just thinking about triggers. It's really, again, we have code standards in place to avoid
Right.
light trespass.
That's my point.
And it's really hard when you get something in at the counter to just say, okay, is this project going to have exterior lighting with glare potential based on, what I'm going to see?
Yeah.
So it's not easy for staff to review just right off the bat. Again, when you're taking a project in at the counter, processing it, getting it out, and usually that kind of comes through other things. I'm proposing a brand new house. You see someone lighting up their home, wanting to make it look like Disneyland or wanting to feature all of their landscaping. That's with a brand new house with all kinds of site improvements that your board is already reviewing at the full board level. So we think that will very much be taken care of through this review process, as well as our existing outdoor lighting standards and the code that address our the compliance with dark star or night sky requirements. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up all my words. It's pregnancy.
That's all right.
No, that's fine. I think we agree with it, that it's covered by other items.
It's covered.
So it's really, it's hard to answer that question because I don't think it's gonna, I think we feel safe by removing the notice, because we feel like the noticing would be addressed through other scopes of work, or if it was just coming in through a building permit, that it would be addressed. Do these specs actually comply with what
That's my
it
point.
is? So
Just take
agreed.
that line item out, really, because it doesn't
Right.
need to be there.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Hence why we're suggesting its removal.
I thought you
So-
might have something to say. Oh, there's this light that's allowed to be dark sky
No,
compliant.
there's nothing that I
And I'm
can
like,
think
oh, what is
of.
that light?
We typically don't see a lot of residential searchlights, but it could happen, I suppose.
Okay. So Board Member Anderson, did you have any thoughts on the mail notice?
I'm getting tired, honestly. Just, I mean, there's a quandary of, representing the public, and we heard from public that, this is how they get the communication when the design professional doesn't necessarily consider the good neighbor guidelines. So, but, I mean, generally, the whole goal of let's see, I'm tired too. And it's Monday, is the ultimate goal of what we're looking at, and I do believe in that.
Okay.
So generally support, sorry.
No, you're good. Board Member Graffiti?
I'm all in support for this, yeah.
Okay. Did you have any additional items or no? No? Okay, great.
I have one question, not about the lighting, but the 500 cubic yards of grading outside of a main building footprint or on a vacant lot. So can you think of somewhere that this would happen where people wouldn't be noticed for another reason? And is that why you're proposing to increase this? When I start looking at grading quantities and I think of our narrow little streets and neighbors and the roar of the diesel trucks and the, sediment that drops out the back and everything. I mean, we're talking about 50 to 65 loaders. That's 50 to 65 loads of soil. And so I wonder in my mind, is it more about the cubic yardage of grading that should trigger or not trigger? Or should it be more about the quantity of import or export? I don't know what the intent is here. Is it to let somebody know that there's going to be a decent-sized grading project going on in their neighborhood because there might be concerns for siltation or erosion? Or is the intent more to let the neighbors know because there's going to be disturbances in the neighborhood related to those trips? And so I think if we can answer that question, it may start to answer the larger question of whether we want to retain this as a trigger or not.
And Board Member Colas, I think this noticing trigger really has to do more with what the grading is doing to the physical property. So what that 500 cubic yards looks like. Is it elevating the house up onto a podium? Is it carving a huge chunk of the hillside away? I think back when this ordinance was written, there were a lot more vacant lots, a lot more kind of mountaintop removal type projects with significant grading going on. I think that was the intent, and not so much to alert the neighbors about truck trips, although that is a kind of a secondary effect of a mailed notice for a grading project. But typically, if a project does have this much grading, it would probably require a notice anyway, because it would be a new house, a large addition.
That's my inclination, is to think that that's the case. And so if that's the case, then I could see increasing the trigger.
And I think when we get to the findings, you'll also see that you mentioned siltation and other impacts. That's what would bring people out as well, of just, hey, there's going to be some significant site work happening here. You want to know about this.
All right, moving on. So I think we pretty much addressed mail noticing. Any other considerations before we move on? Okay, great. On to the required findings. So
Yes, required findings.
project findings are the most important part of a board's motion to approve or deny a project, and as such, they should be straightforward to apply. We heard from board members that the project findings are often difficult to apply because of their wording and because of some of the findings rely on subject matter that can be outside of the board's purview. We wanted to trim these findings down while still retaining their intent and meaning. There are 5 different sets of findings that apply to various types of SFDB projects, but the ones that are always required are the Neighborhood Preservation Findings, or NPO. Normally, these findings take up 3 PowerPoint slides, but you'll be glad to know that we've reduced them to 1 slide. We tried to shorten them to make it easier for you to make motions. So we have compatibility and character, quality architecture and materials, good neighbor guidelines, trees, and public views. You'll notice that the health, safety, and welfare finding has been removed from this revised set as many board members have felt uncomfortable applying it to SFDB projects, and the public health, safety, and welfare is generally addressed as part of staff's code compliance review of a project application. We also made slight adjustments to the hillside findings to try to make them a little bit more focused on hill slope aesthetics and public views. And the grading findings were similarly edited. And the vegetation removal findings and the FAR findings don't have any proposed changes at this time, so it's just these 3 sets. So our questions now: how do the proposed amendments to the required findings resonate with the purpose and goals of the SFDB?
So I'll start. I thank you for removing the health, safety, and welfare. It just seems like something that comes up, like you said, during code. The one thing I'll say, though, is for compatibility and character and quality architecture and materials, our comments tend to overlap. And so it's the quality architecture and materials that give it the good compatibility and character. And so if there's a way to either combine those, that I think could help. Normally there aren't separate comments for those. I do support reducing the hillside appearance one, combining the hillside findings into one comment. We can go over here to Board Member Kalas. Any comments?
Yeah, I'm fine with what's proposed, and I would concur with what you've said.
So, yeah, I definitely like the reduction, but I do address the quality architecture and materials. It's just kind of a mental note that, yes, they are using, not whatever, plastic windows or something, but, which is okay in different situations, but it's just a trigger for me to look at that element. So if it's combined all in one, then for me, I don't know, it's going to be a little more challenging, but I can deal if we want to remove or
I have a
combine.
comment when you're done. I feel that when we get down to thank you for making them shorter, but I feel that by the time we've debated a project to the point of being comfortable making a motion and the motion's passed, and then at the end, after it's passed, we're stating these findings, I feel like we've already done that with our we wouldn't get to the point of making a project approvable and voting on it and getting a majority approval if it didn't have quality architecture and materials, if we hadn't reviewed the material board, if we hadn't reviewed neighborhood guidelines and taken into consideration all the neighbors concerned, if we hadn't looked at trees, if we hadn't looked at compatibility and character, and if we hadn't looked at views. So I'm wondering why we need it at all. Is there a requirement in the charter that says we have to have it? And if so, is it just for us to remind ourselves of what we already just reviewed?
I think the frustration on the board's part, I'm going to just step in for just a second. I think the frustration
I'm just asking a question.
on the members' parts has been that this just becomes so rote. It just becomes so like, here we go again. We might as well just push play on the tape recorder. And while we tried to bring some tailoring to it and bring specific examples to each one of these itemized requirements and enumerate things for project specifics that address this, it's an arduous extra requirement. And I know it's been asked before, and I know it's been vetted with council, but it just seems like there's got to be, and I think this is what Ms. Sherry's getting, there's got to be some sort of like halfway point. Why can't we just say, this project meets the neighborhood preservation findings for compatibility, quality architecture, good neighborhood guidelines, trees, and public views, and be done?
Exactly. That's my point.
We've already made our comments that speak to this.
So if I may, Chair Lewis, so this is, we've observed all of this. We've observed just the sheer number of findings that you have to make. And many of these projects require not only all the MPO findings, but the hillside, which have multiple, the grading findings. So it's just kind of becomes this like really exhausting exercise after you've reviewed a project once, twice, 3, 4 times at different public hearings. The findings are imperative to make because that is that is what is in the code. That is your job, is to make those findings. So it's actually one of the most important things that you do on this board. And it's the same thing when I'm the staff hearing officer. I have findings to make. When I look at a modification request, I have to, which of these findings can I say, yes, this is how I was able to get to my decision? What we've observed and what we heard from past and present board members was just, again, how arduous it is of, okay, I started with the first MPO finding and then, then I like run out of things to say for the second one. And now, oh my gosh, I just repeated myself in this one. And so again, we're trying to condense the number of findings you actually have to make in order to, and even just the wording is just, it's really difficult to try to make motions on the spot. And so part of it is just a comfort with motion making, getting familiarizing yourself, understanding what projects, but we can't just say, yes, it's compatible with, it's compatible and their quality architecture materials, because if a project is appealed to the higher level, your findings are what's in the minutes. So if we don't have any detail as to how you all were able to make your approval or denial or approval with conditions, then we really, it's hard to qualify. We can't put words in your mouth necessarily. And that's why being so specific for each and every one of these. So again, I think in our effort, we're trying to consolidate, reduce without losing context. And then, of course, internally, we've made some proposed changes, and then someone else comes in and says, well, you're losing this. So if you think that there are more things that we could strip down even further, that, again, that you all would need to tell us, because I think we're sensitive to losing out on the potential to have oversight over certain things, and we don't want to lose the context of the board unless that's direction coming from you all. Because I think that our intent was, we're not trying to redo the neighborhood preservation findings. We're trying to make it easier for you to make motions and to, again, maintain the purpose of the board.
Board Member Sherry, do you want to add to your comment at all, or?
I'm done.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Board Member Anderson?
I mean, we went through that whole training on the specifics for the appeals. So, I mean, maybe, we have checklists for us, but having, I now do my own checklist on when I review each project and, go through, compatibility, character, and try to come up with the specifics. So I understand the legal ramifications of that. I think it needs to be documented, because if you've gone to the appeals, that's where it comes out.
Okay, Board Member Graffiti?
No, I'm great with this. I'm glad you guys removed the one and compacted it a little bit, and yeah, I understand why we have them.
Okay. I think everyone's spoken.
All right, thank you. Okay, and to kind of finish up, is there anything missing from the findings?
I'm hearing that you all aren't trying to add anything. So I think we can maybe skip that question
Can we
in the
look
sake of
back at the
time.
revised grading findings?
This was something that the changes that it was consolidation, also something that, again, looking at the types of projects that you get, understanding your purview to, part of the purview of protecting the hillside and the scenic characteristics of the city, and trying to keep the decision into a comfort level of aesthetics and to things that you have expertise in. That's kind of the changes.
My comment would be that you've repeated yourself on A and both A's have, the last of it says, not significantly modify the natural topography of the site. And you said the same thing on the one below it. So if you could take out the sentence and put it all into one and just make it hillside findings instead of having an A and an A, just make it one.
Yeah, sorry, it's confusing. These are two separate findings. So not all projects. Some projects are in the
got it, okay.
hillside and trigger the hillside findings,
Can I
and
ask, are
only
there-
grading projects will trigger the grading
Are there any
findings.
projects that are hillside that don't have grading findings? Okay,
Yeah, pretty frequently.
okay.
I have concerns over the verbiage in the grading findings. When they're talking about erosion control and appropriate revegetation. The bulk of the board are licensed architects in terms of current makeup. We're not civil engineers, and we're not landscape architects, although Ms. Graffiti has some landscape experience. So for us to be commenting on the appropriateness of the type of revegetation or the erosion control measures, I mean, we are really depending upon the building department's review of the civil engineering to make that determination. And I've always been uncomfortable with this finding and saying, yeah, I can assert that this is not going to slip down the hill. Like, that is not my professional purview. And I would encourage you to have a conversation with council about that, because I think you're asking us to assert something that is not within our areas of expertise.
I agree with that. Can I ask, how many more items are there? We have some board members who are going to need to leave.
It's really,
We have one more set of questions. Two code amendment sets, and then one more set of questions. It shouldn't
Okay.
take too long.
I do agree with Board Member Colossa's statement about that, and that needing to be more under something as a part of the code analysis that happens, not a design recommendation from our team.
Yeah, either that or just changing the verbiage, because I think that it's designed to avoid visible scar. Yeah, it's like that middle section that feels like, ooh, I don't know if I'm the right person to be able to say that that is designed to avoid scarring and erosion control, and that's where it starts getting a little dicey.
Okay, if we can move to the next item.
Great, thank you. All right, minor zoning exceptions. So in addition to updating Chapter 2269, we're proposing complementary updates to the Title 30 zoning ordinance. Currently, all minor zoning exceptions in Title 30 require a public hearing. We heard from our stakeholders that many MZE requests, particularly for tall hedges and fences along interior lot lines, don't always warrant a public hearing. And our proposed code changes are to make the community development director the review authority with the discretion to refer MZEs with potential neighborhood or privacy impacts to the SFDB. Another opportunity to reduce the number of hearings and the cost to the applicant lies with FAR modifications. An FAR mod is required for projects that exceed 100% or projects that exceed 85% FAR and are more than 25 feet tall or on a 30% slope or have significant grading. As a reminder, FAR maximums only apply to lots under 15,000 square feet and developed with 2 stories. We heard from board members that FAR is more of a design-related issue than a land use one. Therefore, we'd like your feedback on the idea of converting FAR mods reviewed at PC, Planning Commission, to FAR design waivers reviewed at SFDB. So if the board were to become the review authority, appeals of FAR design waivers would still be referred to Planning Commission. And this would eliminate the need for these projects to go to Planning Commission if they were converted to design waivers, and this would save applicant time and money and still result in a reasonable level of discretionary review.
I would support that. I think it's another, it's like a show hearing. It's just another step that the applicants have to go through. And really, they just end up coming to us for positive comments. So we're already there by the time we make those positive comments. So I would take no exception to that.
I agree. As an applicant that went through that process and there wasn't a lot of feedback from Planning Commission, most of the comments were unsure how to give feedback about it. I couldn't agree more.
And to be clear, I think we're talking about the
FAR
design
correct,
waiver.
not
Okay.
the, yeah.
It's probably the easier of the two.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like there's general consensus on that. Okay.
Okay.
And then, do you want to read the other question?
Yeah, so the other question is regarding MZEs. Do you support amending Title 30 to make the director the default MZE review authority with the ability to refer MZEs to design review if needed?
Any thoughts?
Yes, as long as he wants to.
Yes. Board Member Kloss?
I'm thinking
Okay.
through MZEs. It's not just one item, right? It's trash enclosures, it's hedges, it's this, it's that. It's like, it's a lot of things. So I'm just
Fences,
trying to give that.
Fences, hedges, trash enclosures in the front yard, within the first, in the front yard. It's screening for mechanical equipment. These are all things when it requires a minor zoning exception. Not only does it require the mailed notice, but it triggers a public hearing. So
I think I would favor that, except in any case where it could relate to a public view, similar to the one that we dealt with recently.
Except for you just said everybody likes trash enclosed, so that's a lot of the time, trash enclosures in the front yard, we all agreed that shouldn't even be an issue.
Yeah, that would be the exception to my statement, yeah.
And just for clarity, if it was under this community development director's review, or, you know, we would still use design guidelines as the principles for how to come to a decision or to apply conditions for the applicant to abide by in order to protect neighbors and or nuisance issues.
Well, pardon my interruption, but through the chair to staff, I think one other note is that for MZEs, for projects that are not located in the design district, it can be downtown or, you know, what have you, and the MZE would require the hearing. So limiting these also limits like all projects across the city for the MZE.
Well, I think right now I just want to concentrate on SFDB
All right,
and
thank you.
conceptually, and we'll be able to address that as part of the, in the fall as we come back with code amendments.
Okay.
All right, any further thoughts on these two questions? All right. Next steps. So after today's conversation, we're going to hold a discussion of the same concepts at Planning Commission on March 21st. So I encourage anyone here to attend. Then we'll return to the drawing board to refine the code amendments with the goal of presenting the full ordinance and guidelines updates at Planning Commission in fall 2024. The design guidelines updates will include updates to what can be approved administratively. And we have a significant amount of concepts, like I mentioned earlier, that we covered during our working group and focus group meetings that we didn't cover today. And those need to be reviewed legislatively by the city attorney's office and will likely warrant another conversation at SFDB prior to Planning Commission in the fall. So code amendments will then go through ordinance committee and city council for introduction and adoption in the fall. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes my presentation, and before we adjourn, are there any other questions or comments
Yes,
you'd
as
like
a
to bring up?
part of this improvements, are you looking at changing this packet of our design guidelines? Or no?
We are not looking to make big changes to the single-family residence design guidelines. Those we think are pretty solid, but if there are suggestions, then we definitely like to hear them.
There's
We are-
definitely inconsistencies based on if these code amendments or if any introducing new concepts, they'll have to be addressed. So it would all need to be, any change to any of the guidelines must be adopted by city council. So just to recognize that, again, we're not trying to generally change a significant amount of, like, the design guidelines are extremely thorough.
They are, and that's my only
yet-
feedback, is that they're quite cumbersome, and so trying to make things streamlined and accessible and easy for applicants, I think narrowing in on the scope, I think, could be beneficial for all parties.
But there's
One-
definitely certain things that are probably inconsistent with our current code because those haven't been updated.
In the general design guidelines book, there's a lot of information that's duplicative with what's in the single-family residence design guidelines. It's even duplicative saying their names. And so we're hoping to condense that set of guidelines and clarify some things and make associated changes to those.
Great.
I have a question for the benefit of the public, if anybody's watching this and hasn't fallen asleep yet. If somebody from the public has any desire to participate in this process and provide comments to staff, how would they go about doing that?
They can reach out to the SFDB secretary. That's one way. The email is sfdbsecretary@santabarbaraca.gov. It's noted on the agenda. That's probably the best way. I will note that prior to fall 2024, though, we're going to be creating a webpage specifically for this project with an email address that is specific to anyone who wants to reach out. So we're still kind of in the preliminary stages of the project. Once we have that website, we'll be able to get more public input.
But just know that there's the Planning Commission hearing on March 21st. Planning Commission starts at 1 o'clock. I doubt will be the first item, but, to follow that, to add your comments. This is the time to comment because these are concepts. And we kind of want to rein it in and then be able to, again, we've done a lot of the groundwork to hear from all different types of different stakeholders and really trying to balance the preservation of the board's purpose with the streamlining goals and trying to, again, maintain a public forum for the items that we think are most important or that we know that people come out for. So that's really, again, trying to balance all the different needs right there. But the Planning Commission and then, like Mr. Hamilton Roll said, just to check back in with staff and design review, and we'll be continuing to be able to notice or at least explain what's going on, and they can follow along.
Okay, great. I want to thank you guys for coming and sifting through all the comments, and just the survey results and all the feedback you've received is a lot, and I want to thank you guys.
Well, thank you all for being guinea pigs with this conversation, because I know that, again, it was like, how do you facilitate a conversation like this? It's really difficult, and again, we appreciate all the confusing concepts and all the things we do behind the scenes. It's very helpful, so thank you.
All right.
Thanks
thank
again.
you.
Yeah, big thank you to Mr. Ted, because I know he's been working on this a long time.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
would you
right.
mind switching?
The Single Family Design Board meeting for March 11th is adjourned.